Yo, Atlas speaking, and welcome. A brand new series on the channel has arrived. This will be the third Avatar fanfiction series to debut on the channel, but certainly not the last. What if I was reborn into the Avatar of the last Airbender world as the legendary Antithesis Avatar? Synopsis: everything has an end. Everything has a limit of strength. There is a ceiling beyond which it is impossible to grow. But at the end, you can find a new path, repair or reshape a broken object, and break through the ceiling. Weaknesses can be overcome, and shortcomings turned into an advantage. I know that well. I learned it from myself. Make sure to check out and support the author linked in the description. Without further ado, let the tale begin. Chapter 1. Where should I begin my story? I asked. From birth? No, that's too far back. If we go that far, we should start from my past life, but no, the past life is just that, the past. And my birth was quite a long time ago. In that case, I should start from the moment everything changed. When everything went sideways. But first, let me briefly tell you who I am. You probably don't know about the little village on the bank of a small river, not far from Ba Sing Se, near the deserts. It's a very small village. There were about 23 people, including me. That's how I count them: women, children, old folks, and men. 23 people, and we lived peacefully there, except for my brother and me. You see, we were born as benders, hee hee. You have a brother? Someone from above asked. Yes, an older twin brother. But unlike me, he wasn't as lucky. I can tell you're the lucky one, came a voice from above, another person. Oh, don't doubt that. If I'm not lucky, then you all have bad luck, I muttered quietly, too low for the others to hear. So, what happened next? The first voice asked. Well, what happened next? We were born in that village. I remember our father. I had a good memory from childhood, but I can't recall my brother's face. He went off to war. He was a war fanatic, always seeing injustice everywhere and so on. Our mother raised us. When I first, feeling thirsty, drew a few drops of water towards me. I was sick at the time and could barely walk. She had just come in with a cup of water. That's when she told us about our family's past. Our grandmother, my great-grandmother, was from the Southern Water Tribe, but she left. She didn't have any bending abilities, and by then, her daughter, my grandmother, who was born and raised there, didn't possess bending either. She had some issues with the local chief or something. But then I demonstrated waterbending for the first time in several generations. A recessive gene, I suppose, made itself known. What? The second voice asked from above. Oh, nothing much. Our mother told us about our ancestral history, but she doesn't know how to develop or train this bending. But I was curious. Besides, my brother soon demonstrated the same ability. Curiosity and the desire to accomplish something on our own drove us. So, we began learning bending independently. Independently? Completely on your own? Without a teacher or at least written records? The second voice asked incredulously, presumably a younger and more curious individual. And how did people first learn about bending? The voice asked. Did the lion turtles teach them? Even if they did, they must have learned it from somewhere. Everything, be it blacksmithing, construction, painting, combat, or bending, at some point, was learned through trial and error, by finding one's own path. The right path. That's how it worked for everything: blacksmithing, construction, painting, combat, and bending. So my brother and I, with no other options, followed this path, independently learning new things and making mistakes. Oh, I remember all those hours and days we spent meditating in the knee-deep water of a small pond, trying to feel the water and learn to control it. And why did you think that was the right way? Second voice asked. Did first voice leave or something? Well, why not? I asked in response to the voice. In my past life, I remember everyone talking about how to grasp the ungraspable, or something like that. You had to meditate, renounce all irritants, and focus on your goal. So I decided to give it a try. And my brother, despite being older, decided to try the same thing, even though he didn't have any ideas of his own. You said that the past is now in the past, the first voice scoffed, still not believing my words about my past life. He hadn't left after all. But that doesn't mean I should forget it and not use what I can extract from it. And what I have are just my memories. After many hours spent in the water, relying purely on determination, I managed to lift a couple of water droplets into the air for the first time. You can't imagine how my brother and I shouted with joy at that moment. It was incredible. Soon, under the influence of my success, my little brother managed to do the same. And how much time did it take you to achieve that success? Second voice asked. 1 year, 2 months, 1 week, 3 days, I promptly replied. The first step is always the hardest in anything. It's the one that's most difficult to take, no matter what it applies to. Even toddlers need a lot of time and effort to take their first step, along with numerous attempts. But after the first step, everything becomes much easier. Controlling water was difficult, it was fluid, and the only way to hold it still in one place was either as ice or a puddle. So my brother and I concluded that constant motion was crucial in water manipulation. It didn't matter if the movements were small or large, as long as there was some form of motion. We understood that rule and the subsequent one. Smooth movements were more suitable for waterbending. Subconsciously, we humans associate water and its movements with smoothness, which is why it's psychologically easier to control water with smooth movements. What happened next? Second voice asked again. Training, bragging to our mom, and things like that, I replied. There was a boy in the village who was an earthbender, and he was also striving to develop his skills in that direction. However, he had written records to make his development easier. But my brother and I had a bit more success, indeed. According to my mom, I had a talent for this. Yes, indeed, many people know that now. You showcased your talent quite well, especially last time, first voice chimed in. What can I say? A cornered rat, as they say. I left the sentence unfinished, knowing they would understand as they had heard me say it before. In short, that's it. Now, back to the point. When my older brother and I were 14, some kid caught us practicing. He was quite young, only about 10 or 11. It's funny that everything that happened next started with him. He was the son of a trader who had stopped in our village for some rest. My brother and mom didn't pay much attention to it, and neither did I, but I have a good memory, as I've mentioned before. The trader left the village the next day, and 3 days later, soldiers from the Fire Nation arrived in the village. They were looking for water and earthbenders. Our parents and all the villagers refused to cooperate, but the soldiers didn't wait. Moreover, they had a firebender with them. They burned down the village. Killed the inhabitants. My brother and I fled. I knew trouble was coming when I saw soldiers in the distance, and when my mother heard me, she told us to run. So, we ran. We ran for a long time. Out of 23 people, only 2 14-year-old children survived. Twins. Waterbenders. It's a sad story. But that's only the beginning. Hee. You don't have to tell more, first voice said. Your early achievements are known to us. That's when you first made a name for yourself. Well, they didn't even know about you back then, but you showed your skills for the first time. But I'm curious, second voice said. Go on. Standing here and dying in this unbearable heat isn't much better, so let's hear the story. Trust me, first voice paused and addressed second voice, you won't want to know this. We'll see about that. Hey, continue. They sent some kind of creature after us. A lizard or something like that. Some people ride them, but this one was small. Probably young. It caught up to us in half an hour. My brother and I, with our limited abilities back then, fought it off. And we won. Not right away, Of course, and not without cost. It attacked us so unexpectedly. Then I lost my brother. That creature knocked him down and severed an artery. He bled out, barely uttering his last words. You know what those words were? It was "Avenge our mother." For the first time in this life, I cried so long and so hard. It wasn't just crying, it was a real fit of hysteria. In one day, I lost everything I had. My home, my mother, my twin brother, uncles and aunts, friends, and then I realized that the only thing they couldn't take away from me, something that would always be with me, was myself and my bending. I headed back. When I returned, it was evening. The soldiers of the Fire Nation had set up camp not far away, and the light from their campfires was easily visible to me. I arrived at night, when only the night watch was awake. There weren't many of them, but they had enough for a night watch. That was when I killed for the first time in both my lives. It was quick, easy. I felt no inhibitions, no guilt, and so on. A tiny stream of water flowed very slowly right along the ground, hiding in the grass and its shadows. That's how it gathered under each of the 6 guards, and then, the sharp ice stakes easily pierced through the soldiers' bodies, coming out and turning red with blood. Slowly the bodies descended on the stakes, which turned back into water below. I didn't want to make too much noise. When the bodies came down, I remember it as if it was only yesterday. A smile colored my face, and a thin trickle of water cuts no worse, or even better than any blade. I dismembered these soldiers with such pleasure that I never dreamed of. First the legs, arms, then the head, then the bodies and limbs were cut into centimeter discs of bones and flesh, which I carefully placed in piles with water and put the severed heads on top. When I finished with the guards, I went into the tent where the others were sleeping. I brought water under each of the 7 people, and then I killed 4 with stakes, punching 3 more hands and feet, including the bender. Their screams were probably heard for hundreds of meters, but soon they fell silent, despite the pain. They watched as I did to their dead comrades the same thing I had already done to the sentinels. And all this time, I was smiling. Perhaps that scared them even more. Perhaps. I encased the bender almost entirely in ice, keeping the ability to breathe. When I finished with the dead, forming piles with their heads right there in the main tent, staring at the living with a dead look, forcing them to watch their still living comrades. And then I asked only one question to the living. Where did you learn that there are waterbenders here? I asked my captives. Did the merchant tell you? No. Please, let us go, said one of the soldiers. We overheard a conversation between the merchant and his kid by chance. That's why we came here. Is that so? Thank you. I'll kill you quickly, I said, and before the soldier could say anything, the ice point pierced through his skull. Now I turned to the rest. I've already sliced up your comrades, but they were all dead by that time. It would be interesting to try the same with the living, wouldn't it? I asked the firebender, who was looking at me in horror. I'll leave him for last, as the murderer of my mother. I saw her corpse. She was burned alive in the middle of the street. Only a firebender could do that. Chapter 2. After I had finalized the last details of my assassination of the firebender, the second speaker left somewhere for about 10 minutes, leaving me alone with the first. Why are you telling me all this? The voice of the first reached me. You do understand that after something like this, they will keep you locked up even longer, if they ever decide to release you at all? And some of your tales sound like the ramblings of an insane person. Oh, don't worry. Sooner or later, I'll find myself on the outside. If I don't escape on my own, someone will free me, looking to use me for their own purposes, or some fanatic will emerge. And perhaps there will be a traitor among you eventually. There's always a way. All that's left is to wait and not go insane from boredom. And these stories help with that, don't they, dear guards? I asked both guards, lying on the hot stone with my back, sensing the presence of the second guard. You're a psychopath. A damn maniac. Second finally said, emotionally, as he approached the cell bars. Everyone has their own life. Their own goals, hopes, paths to their goals and ways of moving forward. They all have the right to exist. My path has given me the opportunity to avenge my family and loved ones. If someone came to you and killed your entire family, parents, brothers and sisters, friends, all the people dear to you, wouldn't you do something? Really? If you're such a pacifist, then you belong with the air nomads. They were all wiped out decades ago. I know what I'm talking about. I know. Silence fell, and I continued to lie on the stone floor. My back began to ache slightly from the heat. A small smile slipped from my face, and I placed my left hand on the stump of my right, feeling the pain from the missing part of my arm. These pains still lingered and periodically resurfaced. But that was a good thing. Feeling pain meant I was alive. 20 minutes later, the voice of the second came from above again. So, what happened next? He asked, but the first answered him. Haven't you heard enough already? He's completely gone mad. The quiet voice of the first reached me. Fortunately, my hearing was good. But it's still interesting. I have a lot of interesting things for stories and discussions. And as for what happened next, I left the Fire Nation soldiers' camp, leaving behind my intriguing works of art. I seized 3 flasks, which I placed on my belt, on the sides and in the back, filled them, took some supplies, and so I set out on the road, the same road the merchant took and where the soldiers came from. The moonlight illuminated the road, making it easy to see, and it was an effortless walk. The cool breeze went unnoticed, and the dark forest didn't seem as intimidating as before. It no longer made me afraid. It was strange. In my previous life, I had never experienced such fears, but here, despite the experience and knowledge, it felt like I was reliving my childhood, without all of this, experiencing irrational fears again. However, overcoming them had become much easier with experience under my belt. A hangover set in, and I felt the desire to sleep, as my body became heavier, but I needed to keep going, so I continued. I only stopped when dawn began to break. Climbing higher into a tree onto a thick branch, I tied myself to it with a rope and fell asleep. I was awakened by the sunlight piercing through my closed eyes and the sensation of heat. I untied myself and, sliding down from the tree, continued down the road. It was boring. My legs hurt from yesterday's sprint and the long march on the road, and my muscles ached all over, despite having slept. To distract myself, I practiced waterbending. Opening one of the flasks, I extended a stream of water, which formed a rotating, mini-current sphere with internal eddies. Closing the flask again, I practiced changing its shape and other manipulations. My own peculiar, smooth hand movements seemed funny and inappropriate to me, but it was much easier to control water this way. It was probably just a psychological effect, but I still wasn't skilled enough to attempt direct mental control. At least my attempts yielded no results, except for being able to hold tiny water droplets with my thoughts, but nothing more. So time passed more quickly, and the journey became more enjoyable. When I was focused, time flowed by unnoticed, and muscle fatigue was almost imperceptible to my consciousness. Soon, I noticed that the sun was setting, and the sky was painted in a red hue. It was a beautiful sight, to say the least. Another night on the road, and by the evening of the following day, I reached a new settlement. Entering was easy, as there were no walls, and people were still walking around the village. So, I quickly approached a man in sandals with a big belly, thick mustaches, and a contented smile. He looked like he wanted to be hit in the fat belly with an ice block, and I wanted to ask him where he had found his happiness. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm trying to find a merchant who should have arrived here recently. I need to deliver a message to him. Can you tell me if he's still here or has he already left?" I asked the portly man. "Oh, no need to worry, young one. You're in luck. He's been here for trading all these days, and he's only leaving tomorrow morning. So, you'll have plenty of time to pass on your message," the portly man replied with a smile. "Thank you so much, you've been a great help," I exclaimed, doing my best to display a genuine smile and happiness on my face. "No problem at all, lad. Take care," he said as he went about his business. I looked at him and thought that he was quite strange, but it didn't matter. I quickly found the merchant in the village, which was much larger than our little village. I located the house where he was staying and then headed to wait for him on an old bench under a tree, positioned at a distance. I waited through the night. Soon, there was no sunlight left in the sky, and only the stars illuminated the path, along with the crescent moon. For days now, there hadn't been a single cloud in the sky, and the moon's half-light illuminated the road. During the night, I approached the house and knocked on the door quietly, having already opened all the water flasks. Inside, I heard footsteps, and soon the door opened. It was the same merchant. He looked at me, expecting to see someone of his stature, but didn't have a chance to say anything. With a swift motion of my hand, a stream of water shot out from the flask and wrapped around the merchant's mouth, penetrating through his lips and teeth into his mouth. Then I clenched my fist, and the water turned into ice. 2 more hand movements, and 2 large streams of water burst out of the flasks. One of them coiled around his arms, while the other entangled his legs. The water formed makeshift handcuffs and leg restraints, turning into ice. I brought my hands together, and the water stream between the icy handcuffs tightened, pulling his hands and legs together, freezing into thick ice. "Dad!" I heard a voice from a nearby room, along with the sound of footsteps. "Are you coming soon?" And then my eyes fell on a kid, the same one who had witnessed our magic training session with my brother. The very same kid from whom all of this had started. The one who had triggered this whole mess. With 3 more hand movements, I bound the boy in the same way as his father. I quickly went through the house, but found no one else. Returning to the merchant lying on the floor, I leaned in. "Do you know why I came to you, merchant? Here's a hint. You recently stayed in the village where I lived, and your son saw how my twin brother and I were training in waterbending. Then this little one couldn't keep his mouth shut and started telling you everything. I wouldn't care, and almost anyone wouldn't care, but those who did care happened to be nearby. From the look in your eyes, I can tell you're starting to understand. Yes, because of the 2 of you, or rather, because of your son, not too long ago, Fire Nation soldiers came to us. Why do you think I took these actions, and why am I very angry right now? Are you scared? You're right to be, because of you too, I lost my home, my entire village, my friends, my uncle and aunt, my beloved mother and brother. And I am very angry right now. I killed all the soldiers who showed up, but it won't bring back the people closest to me, but I can take final revenge for them." "Oh, I see you understand. Yes, I'm here to kill both of you. And believe me, I'm trained on soldiers, so you should start dreaming of a quick death." With these words, I waved my hand and a stream of water flew out of one of the bottles. The palm of my hand straightened and the stream compressed into a thin thread of water. A wave of my hand and a muffled mooing through my nose, and the first blood splattered around me. Chapter 3. 8 days after the murder of the merchant and his son, I was walking along the road. I kept walking until I stumbled upon a city. The city, again, wasn't the largest, with a fairly large population, but it didn't compare to the bigger cities. However, I happily entered and decided to stay there for a while. "After the murder of the merchant and his son, there was no news about you for quite a while," First said to me. "They were searching for you in the vicinity, and you were right here in the city all along." "Yeah," I replied. When I found out about that, I couldn't stop laughing at the Fire Nation soldiers. "What did you do there all that time?" Second asked. "What else could I do? If you practice, waterbending makes a great tool for pickpockets. You can make a precise cut and remove a wallet, or simply cut the bottom of a wallet, drop the money into the water, and bring it to yourself using waterbending. I lived for a week and a half without money, and all I did was practice with my thin water whip. I had my first successes after 6 days, and I hadn't eaten anything for a day, having consumed all the food I brought with me. That's when I tried my new trick for the first time. I lay on the roof above a stall, carefully cut a piece of fabric, and watched the merchant. I distracted him in various ways, and when he wasn't looking and there were no customers, my water whip quickly snatched the food and brought it back to me. I survived the first 3 days this way, stuffing myself until I couldn't eat anymore. After over a day of fasting, I realized the beauty of being completely satiated. And then you started stealing? Wait! I remember hearing about an elusive pickpocket in Otoro, someone they could never catch. Was that you? The first voice asked. Wow! I became famous even then. Funny, I never received that information about myself, I chuckled. Then, 3 months later, a gang started operating in the city, led by a guy they called Elusive Joe. He got that nickname from his own gang members. Ha 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 ha. I couldn't help but laugh, remembering how I introduced myself as Elusive Joe. Oh yes, that was a lot of fun. It all started 2 weeks after I successfully amassed my fortune. I remember I had just cut a wallet from a careless rich man. The money I got from him would have sustained me for a month, maybe a month and a half. But I was saving up. I wanted to buy myself a house with a big basement. A really big one. So I could practice waterbending properly, although practicing with water whips was also yielding great results. After nearly a month of constant use, I realized that controlling water in the familiar volumes had become much easier. And by that time, I had 3 water whips. That's 3 times more wallets at a time. One time, as I was returning to one of my hideouts to take some of the money I had accumulated, I saw 9 guys, each ranging from 11 to 16 years old. And these scoundrels were dividing my money. Hey, listen! Are you completely out of your minds, touching my money? You better put it all back right now, and if I don't count every coin, I'll slice all of you into pieces. I shouted at the guys. They jumped when they heard a voice behind them, but when they got a good look at me, they calmed down and started to smile. Are you going to cut us up? There are 9 of us to your 1, and you're just a kid, the oldest of them said, although I was older than at least 2 members of their gang. Are you sure you want to find out if I can cut you up or not? Keep in mind, and all of you should keep this in mind, I looked at the rest of the guys, then back at their leader, you're responsible for everyone. And you'll bear the consequences as well. Ready to take on this challenge? The guy glanced at the others, then looked back at me, smiling widely. Well, go ahead, give it a try. He began to say but never got to finish. After standing for another second, maybe 2, the upper part of his head rolled down the lower part, following a slanted and smooth cut. The upper part of his head, part of his nose, and 1 ear fell to the ground, and then his body fell due to his crooked legs. I continued to stand there with my hand raised, with a barely noticeable water thread at the tip of my middle finger. Well, you tried. Now, hand over the money. I shouted at the other guys who were in shock, wide-eyed, and staring at the corpse of a guy who wasn't much older than themselves. However, my words snapped them out of it, and they immediately started scattering. I specifically chose locations for my hideouts that met 2 conditions. There was a recess for some large containers nearby, and there was 1, at most 2 entrances/exits. Since I was standing on one side, they all ran in the opposite direction. But I lunged forward, raised 1 hand upward and scooped up the water from a large basin covered with a lid. Continuing the motion, I used my other hand to support and push the mass of water as if from below. A large water tentacle burst out of the basin, merged with the second from the neighboring basin, and this stream of water raced across towards the guys. Upon hitting the ground in front of them, the water splashed and turned into ice, blocking one of the 2 exits with an ice wall. The other exit was behind me. Just to be safe, I glanced behind me to see if anything might happen or if someone might appear there. But there was no one behind me, so I turned back to the guys who were staring at me in fear. Taking the water from the last basin, I covered my hands with it, forming 2 large and thick tentacles that almost touched the ground. At the same time, the water was quite condensed, and there was a fair amount of it. I intentionally stole such containers and placed them in the right spots. It seemed to me that I told you clearly what you need to do. But if you're so eager, I'll just kill all of you and take the money back myself." The guys were trembling with fear, clearly not expecting to encounter a waterbender, let alone that I would be that waterbender. Right now, they began huddling closer to each other out of fear. In that moment, I was only concerned with one thing: what to do with so many bodies. That question worried me quite a bit. I could quickly hide one, maybe two, at most 3 bodies. However, the problem was resolved on its own when one of the guys stepped forward on trembling legs. I thought he was desperate and decided to attack me, but he surprised me even more by kneeling and bowing so low that his forehead touched the ground. He was saying something, but I could hardly hear. Taking a step forward, I extended the tentacle and used it to lift the guy. "What are you mumbling over there? If you want to say something, speak clearly. Please, let me join your gang. Don't kill me, I beg you," he shouted after taking a deep breath. I looked at him in amazement and then glanced at the others. They followed the daring guy's example, falling to their knees and bowing their foreheads to the ground. Lost in thought, I contemplated the advantages of having a group of guys around my age. After a moment of reflection, I realized it was actually a pretty good idea. "All right. I accept you. But remember, whoever tries to run away or betray me, don't complain from the afterlife." I smiled at the guys who would now be under my command. "I hope they won't try to betray me. Now, guys, I'll ask you once more politely, hand over the money to our base." Chapter 4. The next year and a half were wonderful. The number of people in the gang was growing, conflicts with other groups arose, but they were mostly kids, teenagers, and it was easy to intimidate them, and if they remained stubborn, I took care of them. Waterbending is great in that the element itself changes a person, making us calm, mostly fluid, smooth, and that allowed me to quietly reach my goal, silently killing it, and sometimes leaving behind works of art that would shock many people. And all without any weapons. A flask of water and there you have a universal weapon. In 6 months, I managed to become the main authority, if you can call it that, although such things always amused me. What authority could I have when I had just turned 15? However, now I had a bunch of people under my command, each engaged in their own thing. By the way, I not only managed to subdue thieves. Basically, any teenager in the city paid me a part of their earnings for work. A portion, of course, went to the other leading members of our teenage gang, but most of the money was mine. I quickly bought myself a house with a basement, furnished the house, and spent most of my time in the basement. I had learned my lesson, bending and that's what was most difficult to take away from me, so both needed to be made as strong as possible so that no one could covet it, and if they did, they would quickly pay the price. Waterbending training is very easy to combine with physical training, you know. In my past life, I had a huge amount of martial arts training. I even tried to learn some. Karate, Aikido, Sambo, once even went to a wushu class. What's that? Second asked me. Names of different martial arts. I told you. Want me to repeat? I asked the voice. No, go on. I didn't become a master in any of the disciplines. And I didn't really aspire to that, to be honest. At least not at first. Later, when I turned 20, I decided to do something where the goal was not fighting, but development and mastery. The choice fell on wushu again. I practiced for 3 years before I died and was born again in this world. However, there, in the basement, I remembered all my wushu training and started repeating it, simultaneously adjusting waterbending movements to my movements, and where the movements were too sharp, I replaced them with smoother ones myself. Waterbending almost literally helped me smooth out the rough edges of my skills, which were almost non-existent. But gradually I remembered and repeated everything I had learned, all the movements and taolu, the equivalent of katas for wushu, gradually adjusting all this to waterbending. I didn't know then if this could be classified as martial arts, but I was getting tired, and after a couple of months, for the first time I decided to look in the mirror made of ice, and saw myself. Muscles were growing, body flexibility too. In general, with desire, Probably any bender can become very flexible, strong, and so on, but for waterbenders, flexibility becomes almost the best. Bending greatly helps in physical development if you set your mind to it. And water also helps to recover faster. Also, by the way, an interesting thing. At some point, when my whole body hurt terribly, covered in bruises, I was lying in the bathtub full of clean cool water, and with all my heart I wanted it all to go away quickly. What do you think happened? Right, I felt itching in my body and in the places where I had bruises. And when I looked at myself, I saw how the water literally healed all that I had talked about, all the injuries. But what didn't get into the water, alas, didn't heal, so I submerged myself several times, holding my breath. You know, after that, it became easier to train, because every evening I took a bath and fully recovered, shaking off the fatigue of training. But where did the bruises come from? Second asked me. Where from? From the other guys I fought with during training. Without bending, they would defeat me quite quickly, but over time I became faster and stronger. The training was not in vain. I eventually started feeling like some kind of acrobat. Maybe I couldn't walk on my hands on a ball, but I started jumping to greater heights, performing acrobatic flips in combat. Over time it became easier for me. Imperceptibly, I was getting stronger. This also applied to bending. In my basement, I trained most of the day, practicing both bending and wushu. I learned to incorporate bending into hand-to-hand combat and combat with weapons. As for weapons, well, I served as a weapon, but still. In the meantime, various things were happening in the world. There were rumors of some military campaign in the southern pole. Even before me there was information about constant military clashes across Earth Kingdom territory in almost every Earth Kingdom province. Ba Sing Se was under active siege. Everyone thought there was very little left and the great city of the Earth Kingdom would fall to General Iroh. All his campaigns were successful, and it was believed that this one would end just as successfully. I was making money and was ready to leave at any moment. I felt a little bit of trouble brewing with the little experience I had gained over this time. Let me guess, they started? Of course, they did. I couldn't live peacefully for so long just like that. So, problems started soon. General Iroh lifted the siege from the main city of the Earth Kingdom. I thought all the other nations were supposed to be happy about this event. I couldn't care less, really. I had enough funds to buy a house in some city, even in Yudao, the Fire Nation colonies. Rumors had it that it was nice there. The main thing was that they didn't interfere with my training. But after the siege was lifted, a huge number of soldiers began to move towards safe lands. The number of Fire Nation soldiers in cities and on roads increased. In short, the number of problems multiplied many times over. How did it interfere with you? Second asked. Because, for my searches as the elusive Joe, they started with much more enthusiasm and in much greater numbers. I had to leave a little money for the guys as a farewell and flee with the rest. It wasn't easy to do it quietly at first. A couple of times I stumbled upon Fire Nation patrols. Each time I had to kill them and leave my long-standing pyramids of sliced bodies. Yes, just after the siege was lifted, rumors about you started spreading again. There were many assumptions about what was going on. Oh yes, I tried. Then I decided to head further west, on the border with the desert. I really didn't want to go into the desert. There's almost no water there, and it's my main weapon. So I walked along the border, often along the riverbank. Oncoming Fire Nation patrols were also destroyed by me if there was an opportunity, or I simply didn't come across them at all. My journey was long, you can't say anything about that. I walked very slowly, only about 3 hours a day, the rest of the time training and recovering in the waters of rivers and so on. I aspired to develop, but I couldn't figure out where to go next. However, soon I came up with a simple idea: ice. It's one of the aggregate states of water, solid. Water, on the other hand, is a liquid aggregate state. But there's also steam, the gaseous state of water. And I heard that waterbenders can extract moisture directly from the air. So why not? And then I started learning to control steam. After all, it's still water, just in another state. However, the other state also made itself felt, and it was very difficult to control it. But it didn't stop you, judging by the fact that there are rumors about you spreading even more in the population. Persistence and hard work will crush everything, so soon I finally managed to gather moisture in the air, control steam, convert water or ice into steam, and use it. Steam, if used correctly, is a powerful and terrifying weapon. Not the most destructive, but enormous. Yes, your attacks became even more terrifying afterwards. You simply destroyed camps, buildings, large squads of Fire Nation soldiers. People died from steam explosions or received injuries incompatible with life. Yes. Steam is a dangerous phenomenon. But there are even more dangerous phenomena. Much less destructive, but much more eerie, terrifying, bone-chilling. What do you mean? Second asked me. Doesn't matter, first answered him, it doesn't matter. He's here now, and his bending isn't a helper here. Hey, don't you really know why I'm so exceptional, why they keep me in such conditions? Why I'm given water in minimal amounts, less than what any human needs to survive, why I'm kept over lava, why it's strictly forbidden for anyone to approach my stone cage, and even you are strictly prohibited from approaching my stone cage? I asked, rising and approaching the thick stone grill. No. I wasn't told. They only told me the rules and that's it. They didn't tell me the reason. Really? Hey, first, maybe you'll tell him? I asked first, but didn't hear his answer. You don't want to? Well then, I'll do it myself. Hey, second. All this is done for the simple reason that I am the only known master of bloodbending. Guys as a farewell and flee with the rest. It wasn't easy to do it quietly at first. A couple of times I stumbled upon Fire Nation patrols, each time I had to kill them and leave my long-standing pyramids of sliced bodies. Yes, just after the siege was lifted, rumors about you started spreading again. There were many assumptions about what was going on. Oh yes, I tried. Then I decided to head further west, on the border with the desert. I really didn't want to go into the desert. There's almost no water there, and it's my main weapon. So I walked along the border, often along the riverbank. Oncoming Fire Nation patrols were also destroyed by me if there was an opportunity, or I simply didn't come across them at all. My journey was long, you can't say anything about that. I walked very slowly, only about 3 hours a day, the rest of the time training and recovering in the waters of rivers and so on. I aspired to develop, but I couldn't figure out where to go next. However, soon I came up with a simple idea: ice, it's one of the aggregate states of water, solid. Water, on the other hand, is a liquid aggregate state. But there's also steam, the gaseous state of water. And I heard that waterbenders can extract moisture directly from the air. So why not? And then I started learning to control steam. After all, it's still water, just in another state. However, the other state also made itself felt, and it was very difficult to control it. But it didn't stop you, judging by the fact that there are rumors about you spreading even more in the population. Persistence and hard work will crush everything, so soon I finally managed to gather moisture in the air, control steam, convert water or ice into steam, and use it. Steam, if used correctly, is a powerful and terrifying weapon. Not the most destructive, but enormous. Yes, your attacks became even more terrifying afterwards. You simply destroyed camps, buildings, large squads of Fire Nation soldiers. People died from steam explosions or received injuries incompatible with life. Yes. Steam is a dangerous phenomenon. But there are even more dangerous phenomena. Much less destructive, but much more eerie, terrifying, bone-chilling. What do you mean? Second asked me. Doesn't matter, first answered him, it doesn't matter. He's here now, and his bending isn't a helper here. Hey, don't you really know why I'm so exceptional, why they keep me in such conditions? Why I'm given water in minimal amounts, less than what any human needs to survive, why I'm kept over lava, why it's strictly forbidden for anyone to approach my stone cage, and even you are strictly prohibited from approaching my stone cage? I asked, rising and approaching the thick stone grill. No. I wasn't told. They only told me the rules and that's it. They didn't tell me the reason. Really? Hey, first, maybe you'll tell him? I asked first, but didn't hear his answer. You don't want to? Well then, I'll do it myself. Hey, second. All this is done for the simple reason that I am the only known master of bloodbending. Chapter 5. What's challenging about using imagination? The fact that you can't force it to work according to your will. You can try for hours and days to come up with something, but nothing will come to mind, and then, during rest, sleep, attending to needs, breakfast, lunch, or dinner, just during a walk, or when you're in bed with a girl, imagination can just suddenly come up with something. Something that ignites inspiration with a new force, like it never did before. That's how it was for me. I struggled for a long time with the problem of further development, because water, ice, and even steam were already relatively easy for me by that time. Of course, I could try to further complicate tasks and increase mastery in these three aspects, which I did for lack of a better choice, but that would mean I gave up, that I limited myself to these aspects and stopped looking for new ones. I didn't want that. Bending, the few things that were always with me, and I wanted to make it as versatile, useful, and all-encompassing as possible. But until I discovered something new, I continued to perfect what I already had. My progress practically stopped altogether. And after a week, I stopped altogether and settled in a clearing in the middle of the forest. Using waterbending, it was quite easy to make myself a good shelter, almost a full-fledged house. Yes, they found it, but you were long gone by then. Well, I couldn't live in the forests forever. I stopped there just to train and not be distracted by the road. And I trained. I made myself a big pool, filled it with water and ice. There, I recovered after training and just relaxed. It was there that I tried mud baths once. It was alright, the sensations were quite unusual, but I just prefer hot water. And it's not difficult for me to make water hot. Finding food in the forest is not difficult. I found some animals, often large ones. Once, I remember, I stumbled upon a duck-billed bear. He saw me, ran, growled through his beak, and I waited. He opens it, and with a wave of my hand, I send him some water into his mouth, and then bang! And his head explodes due to the rapid expansion of the steam that the water turned into. I then got his heart, liver, a lot of meat, bones with bone marrow. There are many herbs in the forest, and our mother was just an herbalist, so she and my brother also taught me how to handle herbs. So with herbs and sliced meat, I cooked myself rich meat soups with the wonderful taste of the juices of various herbs. I never ate fried meat and never made a fire. Why would I, when I can use steam to warm myself? I ate meat soups, steamed meat, in short, I ate wonderfully, despite living in the forest. And it was so great to eat a stew made from sliced heart and liver, cooked in their own juices, with mushrooms, berries, and spices added. You can't even imagine how delicious it was. Hey, cut it out, we already have an appetite, and your stories are making us drool. Second exclaimed indignantly. Do you think I don't want to eat? Do I need to remind you that I haven't eaten anything for 2 weeks here and I'm only occasionally drinking? And as for drooling, remember how I chopped up the merchant and his child while they were still alive, and now imagine that the dish you crave is made from their flesh. Yuck, that's disgusting. What are you talking about? Now I won't be able to look at meat dishes at all. Second spat out, disgusted, while the first just chuckled. Ha 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 ha. But it worked, didn't it? It usually instantly kills the appetite for unprepared or unaccustomed people. Overall, I lived quite well in the forest, ate abundantly in very tasty food, trained a lot, and then rested. But how did you then? Second was about to ask, but I interrupted him. Don't rush. Where are you hurrying? I'm not in a hurry, I have nowhere to rush to. And we'll get there. There's just a little bit left. Actually, we can start now. It all started with a squirrel. Just an ordinary squirrel. It annoyed me with its noises, but it was hiding in the foliage, and I didn't know where it was to kill it. But I didn't want to chop down the whole tree, it was right next to my shelter. And one day, when I was particularly irritated, a thought flashed through my mind: it would be interesting to take that squirrel and make it kill itself, and then it suddenly struck me. Blood is also a liquid. Humans and most other living creatures are mostly made of water. So why not try? And I did. Failure. Tried again. Another failure. And so it went on and on. However, just under a month later, I unexpectedly succeeded. It was a full moon. I had long noticed that under the moon, my waterbending abilities became slightly stronger, as if someone was taking some of the work off my hands without asking for anything in return. This effect was most pronounced during a full moon. And it was during a full moon that I was able to feel and take control of the blood in a small rodent I found in a cave not far from the clearing. Controlling living creatures like this was extremely difficult, it drained me of my strength, but it was progress. I discovered a new aspect of waterbending. The next day after the full moon, I couldn't repeat it. It was too difficult or too draining. So I left. There was no point in staying there anymore. I had achieved what I came for. I found another path of development. I found where to take the next step. Now I just needed to prepare for that step. It was too difficult, and my skills were insufficient at the time. There was a time when even controlling 5 threads of water was barely manageable. Now, I could barely manage one. But skills grow, mastery grows, and I grow too. I just need to grow. Get better. And it made no sense to do it there. In further paths, I logically continued to develop the idea of bloodbending and eventually came to the simple realization that plants and trees also contain water. Along the way, I began to attempt to control this water within them. I must say, it was much easier than controlling blood. And when I succeeded, extracting this water was not difficult at all. It was incredible to watch as the trees shrank and shriveled before my eyes, and the grass immediately dried up, completely devoid of moisture. Yes, the spectacle was simply mesmerizing for the first couple of dozen times. I played with this new skill for a long time, and then I went further and began to try to control plants through the water inside them, just as I controlled the rodent through its blood. My successes were talked about for a long time. Yes. And sometimes they still talk about it to this day. It's not easy to forget something like that, especially if you've witnessed it personally. First said grimly. Yes, exactly. It was just recently. 2 months ago, to be precise. But you were finally caught. First exclaimed with satisfaction. Oh yes, you did a great job. Managed to catch me, a 16-year-old self-taught bender, haha. You know, despite how they call me, a master of bloodbending, I'm actually not very good at it. Yes, I can take control of 3 or 4 people, but that's not what made the other soldiers fear this bending. No, you, people of fire, fear this bending because it makes its wielder extremely difficult to kill. Maybe I'm weak in bloodbending externally, but internally, you know, being here, I hardly lose weight at all, and I get rid of body heat, which accumulates on its own, with my bending, returning all the moisture back. This allows me to manage quite well even with the little water you give me to drink. Not perfect, but I control many processes happening inside me. But with all this, you were horrified by how during the attack on me, I drained the bodies of your soldiers dry and sometimes even benders. How I used their blood. I wonder if those who survived will dream about it for a long time. You captured me, congratulations, but I wouldn't say I lost. Remind me, please, how many soldiers and benders died in the process? No one answered me. Hey, isn't it difficult for you? I asked my overseers. 234 people. Out of 250. Oh wow! I almost managed to kill them all. I would have made a huge tower of human flesh there. But someone managed to sneak up on me, alas. I'm too used to using waterbending with all limbs, so it was very unusual when my right hand was unexpectedly chopped off. And I'm right-handed, just so you know. How am I supposed to live without a girlfriend now? Then, from the shock that hit me after losing a limb, I didn't notice one of the soldiers behind me. And after a blow to the back of my head, I found myself here. Chapter 6. Well, make yourself comfortable. You're going to be here for the rest of your days, said the first loudly to me, and I heard his retreating footsteps. Sure. Thank you. For what? Asked the second after a couple of seconds. For listening, for your words. What words? The wish to settle in here? No. During the whole story, I was thinking about how to use my bending here, to break out, but the first is right, my bending is completely useless here. This is, perhaps, the ideal prison for a waterbender of my level, because I have to constantly use bending to survive. Ah, I didn't think that I would end up in prison at 16, and even as a one-armed invalid, now I won't waste a lot of time thinking about how waterbending will help me get out of here. Your words helped me realize its futility in the current conditions. I'm glad you realize that. And now be quiet for a while, you're getting annoying, said the first, returning to his post. Did he go to relieve himself for a short time? As you say. You're the boss here, I'm the prisoner. You said, I obeyed. Silence settled. There was nothing for me to do here. The size of the cage did not even allow me to stand up to my full height. The edge size was 1.5 by 1.5 meters. And there was stone everywhere. Good thing it wasn't metal, that would have heated up from the lava heat below. The stone was a bit better. I sat down on my legs, which I folded in the lotus position, and sat in the very center of the stone cage with bars on the edges. It was best to sit in the center. At the bars, the heat from the lava was much more intense and it baked more, so I tried not to approach there too often, and I had to constantly work on getting rid of excess heat energy from my body into the surrounding world and not lose moisture in the process. If it weren't for the bloodbending training, which allowed me to achieve greater and greater heights in ordinary waterbending, I wouldn't have survived here. The conditions here are too harsh for a waterbender. And not only for water. Sitting in the cage in the lotus position, right in the middle, I thought. The first was right, waterbending won't help me get out of here on my own. There are big problems with water here. In the worst case, I can use my blood, but that's really the worst case, when the alternative is guaranteed death. Now I managed to survive, and quite successfully. From the forced idleness, various thoughts constantly crept into my head. One of them was the thought of where people really learn bending. On their own? But how, in that case, did they come to control the elements right away? Among the guys from my gang, there were legends that before, all benders were one. They did not control the elements, they were all energy benders, but then they mastered the elements. Is it possible that the division into peoples is just a consequence of the fact that from generation to generation, benders developed abilities to some one element and it reflected on them? It reflected in the fact that they gained huge abilities and potential in their element, but completely, or almost completely turned away from the other elements. In principle, such a hypothesis has the right to exist. And, since there is nothing to do anyway, you can try to test it. Remembering the distant childhood with my brother, when we sat for days on end in the backwater, meditating on the element of water, I sat in the cage in the same way and meditated, detaching myself from all irritants. From the sounds of boiling lava far below me, from the hot and dry winds, arising from temperature differences, from the multitude of other extraneous sounds, which gathered into one general background, which was very distracting. From the feeling of liquid in me and the feeling of liquid in the soldiers of the Fire Nation, who guard me at a distance sufficient for me to do nothing to them, but insufficient for me not to feel them. I detached myself from everything. Absolutely from all feelings. Leaving only one. Focusing only on one single object, on one element. With all my being I focused on the element of earth. Do you think I achieved success, was able to feel it? Nothing like that. I sat like that all the time, distracting myself only by drinking 2 more sips of water a day. Such a trance, when you focus completely on one thing, goes very unnoticed. You don't understand how much time has passed, only the feeling of water made me come out of it, when it was near me. I counted the days not by the sun, no, and not by the moon. I didn't see them, only 2 new sips of water every day let me know that another day had passed. Soon they turned to me again. "Hey, are you still sane?" a familiar voice asked me. Thinking for a second, I remembered that it was the voice of the second. "Don't hope." "Decided to talk? Stopped annoying with your chatter?" I asked him. "What? What are you talking about?" "Wait, you were silent for half a year just because my partner told you to shut up?" he asked me in shock, but I only paid attention to one thing. Half a year had passed. "He's the boss, I'm the prisoner," he said. I obeyed. "Yes, I remember. You know, rumors reached us about what was happening in the outside world. I still have half a year to serve here. After that I can finally return home, to my wife and 3 children. They miss me so much. I received a letter from them once 3 weeks ago, so they can't wait for me to come back. She told me. I want to tell someone, but there is no one. The others already found out about it themselves. Imagine, Prince Zuko, the eldest heir of the Fire Lord, was exiled and stripped of all his regalia after losing an Agni Kai to his father Ozai. That's incredible. Such an event happened for the first time in the history of the dynasty. Now the Fire Lord has only his heiress left, Princess Azula. They say she's a beauty, and in firebending, they say she's a genius. Maybe even comparable in genius in her element to you, Joe. You know, when everyone found out that you are the same elusive Joe, the name stuck to you. Only now without the elusive. Well, you're to blame, you never told me what your name is. Let it be so. Let it be Joe. Also a good option. Hey, what does that mean? Since half a year has passed, does that mean I'm 17 years old now? I exclaimed. I don't know. I didn't count. Probably. Just don't expect a gift, hee hee. So I didn't expect. But maybe at least let me drink normally? A couple of glasses, at least. There's not enough water for me to escape anyway, so I promised to just drink it all right away. You want a lot, Joe. Actually, not that much. Well, okay, no means no. But this time, when I came out of the trance, I saw that the cup, which the guards lower by a rope, was full this time, although before there was always water at the bottom. Extremely carefully drinking the water, and also using bending to collect everything to the last drop from the cup, I immediately began to help the body assimilate all the drunk water, so that I didn't even have to pee. That would be too wasteful. And so, during the captivity here, despite all my efforts and endeavors, despite my skills in controlling the processes in the body that have grown during this time, I still dried up a little. I can't completely stop all the processes and stop spending the available resources. I just use them as economically as possible, not wasting anything in vain. This one full cup of water alone will prolong my life here, preventing death from dehydration and starvation for about 3 or 4 weeks. Hey, second, thanks for the gift. I won't forget. You're welcome. Just don't tell anyone. I broke so many rules with this action that Mom don't grieve. As if they don't throw me into the same lava from my place. And yes, I'm already the first, and so far the only one. My partner left a month and a half ago. His term of service here came to an end. And I'm very bored here alone. Stay in my place and you'll know what boredom is. Yes, you're right here. The meditative trance, if it didn't help, then at least it allowed to pass the time, not letting me die of boredom. However, one day, when I was just resting, I was concentrating on one point of the cage, almost drilling it with my gaze. And what was my joy when a small hole began to be drilled in the stone, millimeter by millimeter. Or rather, the stone just very slowly diverged. As soon as I realized this, the process stopped, but now it was clear to me that I had found a new path. I had found the path to freedom. Earthbending. Lord has only his heiress left, Princess Azula. They say she's a beauty, and in firebending, they say she's a genius. Maybe even comparable in genius in her element to you, Joe. You know, when everyone found out that you are the same elusive Joe, the name stuck to you. Only now without the elusive. Well, you're to blame, you never told me what your name is. Let it be so. Let it be Joe. Also a good option. Hey, what does that mean? Since half a year has passed, does that mean I'm 17 years old now? I exclaimed. I don't know. I didn't count. Probably. Just don't expect a gift, hee hee. So I didn't expect. But maybe at least let me drink normally? A couple of glasses, at least. There's not enough water for me to escape anyway, so I promise to just drink it all right away. You want a lot, Joe. Actually, not that much. Well, okay, no means no. But this time, when I came out of the trance, I saw that the cup, which the guards lower by a rope, was full this time, although before there was always water at the bottom. Extremely carefully drinking the water, and also using bending to collect everything to the last drop from the cup, I immediately began to help the body assimilate all the drunk water, so that I didn't even have to pee. That would be too wasteful. And so, during the captivity here, despite all my efforts and endeavors, despite my skills in controlling the processes in the body that have grown during this time, I still dried up a little. I can't completely stop all the processes and stop spending the available resources, I just use them as economically as possible, not wasting anything in vain. This one full cup of water alone will prolong my life here, preventing death from dehydration and starvation for about 3 or 4 weeks. Hey, second, thanks for the gift. I won't forget. You're welcome. Just don't tell anyone, I broke so many rules with this action, that Mom don't grieve. As if they don't throw me into the same lava from my place. And yes, I'm already the first, and so far the only one. My partner left a month and a half ago. His term of service here came to an end. And I'm very bored here alone. Stay in my place and you'll know what boredom is. Yes, you're right here. The meditative trance, if it didn't help, then at least it allowed to pass the time, not letting me die of boredom. However, one day, when I was just resting, I was concentrating on one point of the cage, almost drilling it with my gaze. And what was my joy when a small hole began to be drilled in the stone, millimeter by millimeter. Or rather, the stone just very slowly diverged. As soon as I realized this, the process stopped, but now it was clear to me that I had found a new path. I had found the path to freedom. Earthbending. Chapter 7. 2 guards stood at the ledge, overlooking the boiling lava below, with a cage hanging directly above it. It was quite a distance from the ledge to the cage, and the 2 overseers were not afraid of the sole-known bloodbender. However, at some point, they unexpectedly found themselves unable to move and even struggled to breathe, but there was no possibility of screaming. And at that moment, I rose by the ledge. I had become much drier than before I ended up here, leaner, more sinewy, but that didn't negate the fact that over these 10 months in the cage, I had managed to preserve much of the strength of my body, not completely atrophying. I approached the 2 guards of the Fire Nation and looked at them. Both were armored and helmeted with masks. How did they not melt in this place in such attire? Guys, you know what I'm known for, so I'll ask you to answer honestly. Who among you is the current first, the previous second? I asked, and saw one of them begin to raise his hand after a moment of hesitation, but couldn't due to my control over his blood. I understand. Good job. And don't worry. I won't kill you. A snap of the fingers briefly cuts off blood flow to the brain, rendering him unconscious. I looked at the second soldier and, approaching him closely, I removed his helmet. You know, I'll let you in on a little secret. Shortly before I was captured, I made an incredible discovery for myself. Bloodbending is remarkable in that it's akin to legendary lost energy bending. It allows one to control life forces through blood and can heal very serious wounds. Not on its own. For this, you just need to take the life within the blood and the blood itself from another. By the look in your eyes, I see you don't understand why I'm telling you this. You see, sharing such knowledge is prohibited. One cannot help but boast about it, revealing secrets. However, there's no desire, and you won't tell anyone anyway. After all, it's your life and blood that will restore my arm. I smiled at the overseer. I hadn't spoken with him once. He was taciturn and didn't want to break the rules. Pressing my forehead against his, so that our mouths and eyes were roughly at the same level, I closed his eyelids. Focusing and then opening my eyes and mouth wide, I saw his face do the same, and streams of blood flew from his eyes and mouth into mine. The process lasted for about a minute and a half, after which the body and armor collapsed to the floor. Now it was dry and completely devoid of blood and life itself, and I felt an itch in my right hand. But this time it wasn't the phantom pain from the amputation, but the itch of cell division. The hand began to regenerate. And though it was a slow process, it could be accelerated by 2.5 times by absorbing the blood and life of 2 or 3 more people. Or 1 or 2 weak benders. The first thing I did was head towards where I barely sensed water. It was a barrel of water, which was 1/3 empty, but that was fine. Dipping my head into the water, I began to take big gulps, immediately aiding its absorption. I did this for the next 15 minutes, periodically lifting my head out of the water. What a pleasant feeling it was, to immerse my face in water after almost a year of being parched by dry, hot air with the heat from the lava around. Goosebumps ran all over my body. It felt like there were parasites crawling under my skin. And I enjoyed the full saturation with water. However, soon I forced myself to stop and, taking some water with me in the form of 2 tendrils on my arms, including on the tip of my finger, I walked through the corridors, searching for an exit. Soon I began to feel people and immediately went towards them. I approached a metal door and opened it. It wasn't locked. I found myself in the dining hall and looked around. There were about 24 soldiers of the Fire Nation scattered here and there, and right now, silent, they all looked at me and didn't move at all. "Well guys, pray, I'm running away from here," I said and smiled, and the water tendrils surged forward, piercing the chests of 2 soldiers with icy tips. They were without armor, in shorts and peculiar t-shirts, so it was easy. A twist and the ice, turning into water for a moment, slipped out of the chest hole and transformed back into ice blades, with which I swiftly cut down 6 of them. The soldiers began to act. Some grabbed chairs, as there were no weapons around, while others ran. Water gathered in front of me, immediately transforming into steam, expanding towards the soldiers. The expanding steam wave knocked down all the soldiers and the tables with chairs and everything else. Anyone caught within the steam areas suffered severe burns at first and then were nearly cooked alive. Breathing in hot steam was also extremely unpleasant for the lungs. In short, almost all the soldiers were either killed by me or on the verge of death and would soon die. Only 3 soldiers remained alive. The steam literally bypassed them, causing no harm. In an instant, they stood as if toy soldiers at attention. Well done. The steam was already gathering back into water, forming water tendrils on my healthy arm that was still growing. I approached the people under control and began to perform the same procedures with them as I had done previously with my overseer. It was an unpleasant situation, but absorbing life with blood required a lot of effort, and for some unknown reason to me, simply extracted blood did not suffice. Even if the body was alive and healthy, it required intense concentration, as if commanding the blood to take life with it. And it demanded great strength and a lot of time. Such a thing couldn't be pulled off in battle, but afterwards. After repeating the process twice more, I left 3 desiccated corpses in the former dining hall, more resembling mummies. After that, I headed to the kitchen. There I found several pots of food. Most of them were full, which meant there were 4 times more people here than before. Hurrying, I quickly stuffed my mouth, chewed, and swallowed the food, ensuring it was absorbed as efficiently as possible and put to good use. I really wanted to eat. Despite the blood I received, some substances were still lacking for the complete restoration of my arm. There wasn't much calcium in the blood, so food was necessary. I particularly emphasized cheeses, nuts, sesame seeds, and other calcium-rich foods. After eating, I sat still for a while, making sure I didn't experience intestinal upset after prolonged starvation and ensuring the food was being absorbed as well as possible. However, I sat for a little longer not by my own choice, but because the door opened and another soldier in shorts and a black t-shirt with red trim emerged. Seeing what had happened to the dining hall, he froze, and as I pushed him, more people crowded into the dining hall, also freezing in shock. Acting before they could regain their senses, I formed 5 thin threads of water and sent them at high speed down the corridor at different angles. The soldiers only began to react to my appearance when they started to collapse into neatly sliced pieces, which began to bleed profusely, flooding the floor with blood. After standing for a couple of seconds and listening to the sounds, I formed tendrils over my hands again and headed down the corridor. My further journey through this peculiar prison base could be described as a continuous slaughterhouse. Until I reached the open space, I was only noticed shortly before the beginning of the fight or not noticed at all, as there was no one left to notice. In the open space, I was first noticed by some sentry on the wall, and before I even noticed him myself, he rang the alarm bell. However, just a couple of seconds later, a sharp piece of ice pierced his head, but the alarm had already been raised. But who would respond to this alarm if I quietly cut down a bunch of people inside? As expected, only a few managed to come out, only 16 people, including the sentries on the walls. However, out of these 16, 9 were firebenders, as I learned when I closed them off with an icy wall from the combined stream of fire from all the benders. As soon as the ice wall took on the protection from the fire, I focused and took control of the bodies of 5 benders, directing the flames at the others. I only managed to ignite the 4 who didn't expect it, until the 5 under control stopped releasing fire. When the fire ceased, the ice turned into water, into thick tendrils, each of which transformed into an icy tip at the end and pierced the chests of the free benders, and then everyone else. The soldiers dodged a couple of times from the tendril strikes, but after another round, they were hit by a wall of 30-centimeter long ice spikes that easily pierced through the armored soldiers. The water returned to me again and, transforming into hot steam while maintaining the density of water, flew in a dense stream towards the wall tower, and upon entering, expanded, creating an explosion in the confined space. I knocked the sentries off the wall with several ice spears, piercing them through. Listening again, I didn't hear any sounds indicating anyone else. Bending sensations also didn't reveal anything, so I headed towards the wall. From the wall, there was a view of a volcanic island somewhere in the middle of the ocean. Upon closer inspection, I saw a barely noticeable strip of land on the horizon. Possibly a continent. I hope it's a continent. Chapter 8. As it turned out, I was lucky after all. The prison island was located southeast of the largest continent. However, I learned this later. Initially, upon reaching the water, I constructed a large flat-bottomed boat out of ice, settled into it, and let the water's current guide me towards the strip of land visible on the horizon. It took me 4 hours to leisurely move across the calm waters to reach the shore. Once there, with a simple gesture, I turned the ice boat back into water, and it once again became part of the ocean. Now, I could truly say that I was free and could move on. The question was, where should I go now? After a little thought, I decided to follow the coastline. Sooner or later, I would come across a settlement or a river. By following the river upstream, I could reach inhabited areas. People always prefer to settle near sources of water, making it easier to find them. And so, I set off on my journey. Evening was setting in, and I decided to wait out the night and rest. Using water, I quickly constructed a small ice dome, more resembling a yurt, and climbed into it, sealing the entrance before sleep. I woke up at night, or rather in the morning, as the sun was already beginning to rise above the horizon. Its light was visible, although the sun itself was still below the horizon. I was awakened by the sound of a dull thud against one of the ice walls, followed by a muffled growl. "Who's not fond of life over there?" I muttered, concentrating and listening to my senses. Breakfast, lunch, dinner has arrived. What's the rush? I quickly melted the ice yurt, slightly surprising the bear that hadn't expected such a move. Surprisingly, this bear looked exactly like an ordinary bear from my previous life, only larger. And why did it need such a thick fur coat if the heat here was unbearable? Until the bear reacted, I raised my hand with the palm facing upwards, then slowly began to clench it into a fist. The bear, previously not in the friendliest mood, froze and began to breathe deeper, then started roaring in pain. I waited a bit, continuing to disrupt its heart's normal rhythm, causing chest pains similar to a heart attack. The bear took a step back, then sat down on its hind legs. I stopped tormenting the bear and abruptly clenched my fist. A couple of seconds of loud roaring, and the bear fell to the ground. I waited a bit longer, knowing that even after the heart stops, creatures continue to live for some time as their brain consumes the remaining oxygen. And this organ is always very demanding in terms of resources and energy. After waiting a couple of minutes, I began to carefully remove the bear's skin with water threads, then cut open its belly and began to carefully remove the innards I didn't need, dipping them into the water and throwing them away. After an hour, I calmly submerged the meat and bones with marrow into the water, which I then froze in a large pit I dug in the ground, creating a makeshift icebox for storing food. Some of the meat was already in a large bowl of ice, where it was cut into pieces and subjected to extreme thermal processing through boiling. I'm not sure about here, but in my previous life, consuming poorly cooked bear meat was risky due to parasites. Regular boiling or frying didn't always help. Therefore, bear meat and some other types of meat should undergo prolonged extreme boiling. Meanwhile, I collected herbs and berries growing near the shore, maintaining a high water temperature. The meat was almost boiled in very dense steam. 15 minutes later, after gathering everything I needed, I began to prepare a very rich, meaty soup with berry juice, meat broth, berries, herbs that made the meat spicy but delicious, and the meat itself, of course. 40 minutes of work later, I was already enjoying a thick soup with plenty of spicy meat, which almost brought tears to my eyes. It turned out to be a very spicy dish. But I liked it, so despite the burning sensation in my mouth, I continued to eat with pleasure. Having eaten my fill, consuming half of what I had prepared, I lay down on the grass where I had been eating and began to work on my body, focusing on quickly digesting the food and contemplating what to do next. At first, I wanted to find people, but now I was thinking, why bother? I hadn't fully recovered yet, my hand had only just begun to grow back, and the complete regeneration of the limb would take 3 more days. Besides, why rush there? I had already gained fame as a waterbending genius. Just the act of life absorption and blood manipulation had made me a master, although I still had a long way to go. It's essentially a simple skill in bloodbending, the only problem is time and energy expenditure. But for others, it's difficult, almost miraculous, so I became known as a blood master. I'm proficient with water in its 3 states, even though I'm only 17. And now it turns out that benders can indeed master other elements, but it takes a lot of time to do so. I had to meditate for almost a year, with short breaks of a couple of minutes for a sip of water and then back into the trance. Yes, sometimes I talked to the overseer. In my previous life, when such tasks took at most an hour or 2, which was quite a lot for the vast majority, my period stretched out 5 to 10 times. It turns out that if you don't use the same method in a forced and hopeless situation, where you devote all your time to it, benders need so much time that it's easier for them to become much stronger in their own element during that time. I had no other choice. And the earth became my salvation. Moreover, everyone considers it a priori impossible, so they don't even try to master other elements. So I decided it was worth staying here and calmly developing, as I had done with water before. After a workout, where I used my hands less and focused on my legs instead, trying to achieve success in earthbending, I finished the second half of the soup. In the evening, I made myself another small ice dome, where I fell asleep. Thus, the days passed. Day after day, day after day. Sometimes it was boring, but those were the rare moments when I became stronger and more enduring. And the workouts didn't increase, as I usually didn't think about boredom, recovering in the ocean water. The rest of the time was occupied with food, workouts, meditations, and sleep. Not the greatest variety, but fully occupied with these activities, I didn't think about how to live on, what to do, why everything was the way it was now. Constantly busy with my development, I didn't remember my brother, mother, friends, all those who were killed, whose death made me what I am. Earth turned out to be an interesting element. Like water, you could control it in different ways, interact with it differently, and get different results. It was easiest to control earth and stone when you touched it. Not what you were controlling exactly, like a small rock. No, touching the ground as a whole. You could also do it without touching. Earthbenders used a contactless method, hurling rocks and keeping them in the air. But creating a mound in the earth was much easier because the bender touched the ground. My location was perfect. There was a huge, practically boundless source of water, as well as excellent soil and stones. It was easy for me to hunt in the forest. Bloodbending was particularly helpful in this. I prepared meat in advance, storing it in the icebox, fortunately with a very large capacity. Everything was going steadily. I had restored my hand and started actively regaining my physical form, and then continued to train further. Earthbending, it came to me. Up to a certain point. At some moment, I realized that despite the training, I wasn't showing any new results, wasn't making any progress. I simply wasn't developing. I had already thought that this was my limit in this bending, as there's a legend of the Avatar, the one who mastered all the elements. Such thoughts and the lack of any progress over the course of a month weighed heavier and heavier on me and made me drop my hands. However, eventually, after a month and a half and 3 days, there was a breakthrough. I don't know the reason, but after I started training in earthbending right after another meditation session, I reached the level that was my limit, and then just went further, not even noticing it, as if there had never been that limit I had been bumping up against for a month. Chapter 9. Once, guests came to me. I was sitting on a mound of earth I had made myself, covered in grass, calmly eating a salad made of grass and berries, along with well-steamed meat with a sauce made directly from the juice of some herbs and berries. Waterbending was very helpful here. I also managed to carve a large flat plate hat out of water. Initially, I made a regular flat plate, but then the idea came to me, and I carved a hat plate out of wood using water. You wear it as a hat, then you take it off, turn it over, wash it, and put food on it, then eat. Wash it again and wear it again. The wood was already dry, again thanks to waterbending. In short, it turned out to be a great thing. It was also easy for me to carve it. I took a sphere of water, placed a piece of wood of the desired size inside, and simply shaved off the excess with streams of water in the sphere. And it was really cool. So there I was, calmly eating, and I can eat a lot at once. I have a healthy appetite, when I sensed 3 people somewhere in the forest. By this time, my sense of water had seriously improved, especially my sense of blood, so I could distinguish one creature from another. 3 people were moving towards the beach, a bit away from me, and they were moving quite fast, considering they were running through the forest. I continued to eat and wait for the guests. Soon they appeared and, just coming out from behind the trees, froze in shock, staring at the endless waters of the ocean. It seems they did not expect to find an ocean here. About them. It was a woman and 2 children, who were a head and a half shorter than her. One of the children, whom the woman, presumably their mother, was holding by the hands, tugged at the woman's hand and pointed at me. The woman looked at me and, holding the children, ran towards me. "Please! I beg you! Help! We are being chased. Please, take my children, save them. I will hold them off as long as I can," the woman cried, falling to her knees before me. On either side of her stood 2 children, about 10 years old. Looking closer, I realized they were twin brothers. What a coincidence! I looked at the children, and memories I had been avoiding all this time, almost 4 years, awakened in me. Memories of a brother and mother. And it was them, those who came to me, that reminded me the most. Go away, I told them, returning to my food. Ignoring the family further, I chewed the meat. What? No! Please! She started again. I felt that 16 people had entered my area of perception. I said, go away. You heard me, you have ears. Go along the shore for about 20 steps and then back into the forest. There you will find a convenient animal path, follow it for a couple of kilometers and you will come to a spring. Follow the stream, then head east, there you will be able to get to a road. Now go quickly, before the pursuers arrive. They are already close. Once again, ignoring the family, I continued my breakfast. Quickly finishing all that was prepared, now I prepare food for 1 meal, so I quickly dealt with the remaining food. By this time, the pursuers emerged from the forest, clearly following the family's tracks. They noticed me much faster, so they immediately headed towards me. Who are you? Where did you put the woman with the children? One of the pursuers approached me and began to ask questions. By the way, these were soldiers of the fire people, by the way. Seeing you, I was not surprised. I would have been surprised not to see you here. Seems like it's time to leave this place. A pity. There's still plenty of meat here, enough for about a week and a half. Though I might stay. In response to my words, the soldiers froze, then stared at me again. Are you insane? One of them asked nervously, clearly intending to find out from me where those 3 had gone. It doesn't matter now. You won't be going on any further pursuit, I said, raising one leg. You will stay here forever. The leg dropped, and at that moment, the ground under each of the 16 soldiers collapsed, along with the soldiers into pits 1.5 times their height. A second stomp on the ground and all the pits closed on the sides, and 16 fountains of blood shot up, which I caught and threw into the ocean. The soldiers didn't even have time to say anything before they were crushed. Ah, it's a pity that these guys came out on me. Now, when the pursuit doesn't return, they will send more soldiers here, and then more and more. They will not give me peace now. I will have to leave. Decided, I will live here until the meat runs out, and then perhaps I will head south, to the settlement of Chin. Chapter 10, A Village Named Chin. You know, it's quite something here. Pretty good, actually. A large settlement, lots of people, all living their lives, and if the war ever reached this place, it was only fleetingly and brought almost nothing with it. I liked it here, so I decided to stay for a while. I had no money, so I lived in a stone hut I built myself near the village, in the forest. It was here I learned about the upcoming Avatar Day Festival, an annual traditional festival. And while it might seem like they're praising the Avatar, it's actually the exact opposite. I learned the history of the people in this village and found out they are descendants of the loyal warriors of Chin the Conqueror, who nearly conquered the entire continent over a century ago, if not for his encounter with Avatar Kyoshi and his death. His soldiers founded this village, and ever since, on the day of Chin the Conqueror's death, they burned statues of the Avatars. I found it somewhat amusing, considering it's been nearly a century since anyone's heard anything about the Avatar. I lived in the village for 4 weeks, after which I learned some details about the neighbors. The island, easily visible from the village shores. Previously, this island was a peninsula, part of the continent, but Avatar Kyoshi separated it and turned it into an island, deciding not to fight Chin's huge army. Something tells me she did it not out of fear or because it was easier, but because she simply pitted this army. Most earthbenders I've met, although not many, use their bending in combat to throw rocks and stones, raise earth barriers and walls. In short, they use their bending very inefficiently, which seems utterly foolish to me. Why knock an enemy down with a rock when it's easier to make the earth swallow his feet and then just turn them into dust? I don't understand why almost no one can come to such a simple idea. The only exception are the firebenders. Their element matches, and their upbringing and mentality are shaped by centuries of active warfare. They use such attacks in battle that cause more damage or outright destroy the enemy. But you can't really get creative with their element. So, what's my point? If a bender uses brains along with bending, then a non-bender, an ordinary person, would have to exert tremendous effort and have extraordinary abilities to get close to a bender. Benders can easily take down dozens, if not hundreds, of non-benders. The strongest, I believe, could reach thousands. But most benders just dance around before throwing a stone at their enemy. To me, that's stupidity. I think Kyoshi just pitted Shin the Conqueror's soldiers and turned the peninsula into a full-fledged island. On this island lived and trained the warrior women created by Kyoshi herself. And they were exactly what intrigued me. I dare hope my bending is strong, and hundreds of my victims would confirm this with their corpses, but as for my body, yes, constant training makes me stronger, but I hardly know how to use this strength properly. My combat knowledge is based on old fights with members of my former gang, which was a long time ago, and I could really use a good sparring partner. Maybe I could learn something from them. So, one day I just left Chin Village and headed across the water on an ice boat to the shores of the island. Soon after I landed, I sensed the presence of people nearby. They didn't take any action towards me yet. But soon, as I sat down by one of the trees, they tried to knock me out, but I immediately jumped up and rolled away, getting on my feet, ready to fight. In front of me was a girl of about 16 or 17 with white face paint, highlighted black eyelashes and eyebrows, red eyelids, bright red lips, a yellow metal plate on a headband, wearing green clothes, like a kimono with a long skirt, and armed with fans and swords. And yes, more girls in the same makeup and clothes started to emerge from the leaves. Remembering the statue of Kyoshi, I could tell they took their fashion and makeup from her. Another spy. This one's quicker than the last few. Their quick exchange of words made it clear they didn't consider me a serious opponent but thought of me as a spy they wanted to capture. Well, a great first opportunity to test my physical abilities. Without saying anything, I continued to stand ready for battle, as done in one of the Taolu Wushu styles. Finally, the one who first attacked me from ambush lunged at me, trying to hit me with her fist. I dodged my head to the side and deflected her arm. She moved quickly, as did I. Or was it I who moved as quickly as her? An interesting question. I took a kick on a hard block with both hands. Very risky and painful for the leg. Then, I struck back with the back of my hand to the girl's nose. The strike surprised her, apparently she hadn't encountered such before, so she grabbed her nose. Advancing my success, I stepped forward and, bending slightly, grabbed the Kyoshi warrior's extended leg by the ankle and pulled towards me. She tried to pull her leg back, but only lost her balance and began to fall. Speeding up the process, I knocked her other leg out with mine. The girl fell, trying to get up, but then I had to focus on the others as they attacked me. For a while, I managed to fend them off, but they adapted to me and soon began to successfully hit me in the back and sides, until eventually they hit me on the head. On the back of my head. Damn! Not again. If I wake up in a cage again, I swear, I'll build a huge tower out of the meat discs of all the island's inhabitants, decorated with the heads of these painted warriors. These were my last thoughts as the light faded from my eyes. Chapter 11, At least it's not a cage. The island's residents can live in peace for now. I woke up and found myself tied to a pole. At least for now. Oh, you're awake. Hello, a voice came from beside me. Turning my head, I saw a guy in a coat with a strange hairstyle. And may you not fall ill in vain. Did the local warriors catch you too? I asked. Yes. That was a new voice from the other side. Turning my head, I saw a girl slightly younger than me, also in some kind of jacket. And everything in shades of blue, just like the villagers I had seen. They just got lucky. No way some girls could tie up the best warrior of the tribe, the guy said to his girl. All right, guys, you can keep arguing if you want, but I have business with these warriors. Need to discuss a couple of questions. From the air right in front of me, 2 water orbs formed, which quickly changed shape into flat water blades and flew downwards, neatly slicing through the ropes. As soon as they hit the ground, I took a step forward, but within a couple of seconds, the familiar Kyoshi warriors stood before me. "Hello, girls, glad to see you again. I apologize for hitting one of you during our last encounter. I really wanted to test both your skills and mine. Remembering your words from our first meeting, I want to declare that I'm definitely not a spy for the Fire Nation. With my reputation, they'd either run away or try to capture me in much greater numbers, or just kill me on the spot." Despite my words, the number of warriors around me and the other captives grew, and all of them prepared their weapons for battle. Some had metal fans, others swords. "What are you talking about?" one of them asked me. "Well, I have a bit of a complicated relationship with the Fire Nation. Usually, after our encounters, their numbers significantly decrease. That's how it goes. So don't worry, if I'm spying for anyone, it's only for myself. I came here primarily to familiarize myself with your martial arts. In return, I can offer my help to you and your village. Trust me, I'm very good with waterbending, and not just water, I can also handle steam, heal, and to some extent control plants. So, I hope we can find a mutually beneficial agreement between us." Finishing my last words, I bowed to the warriors, not at all intimidated by the weapons pointed at me. "And who are these?" One of the warriors pointed with her sword at the pole, where the others had been freed because of me. I turned around and took another look at those who had been tied up with me to the pole. It turned out there were 3 of them, 2 for some reason in blue coats, and 1 in a yellow-orange cape with a bald head and blue arrow tattoos on his head and arms. I don't know who they are. I saw them here for the first time. I guess you found and tied them up somewhere on the shore too. I turned back to the still wary warriors. "Oh, right," came from behind, and turning around, I looked at the bald young man speaking. "This is Sokka," he pointed at the guy. "This is Katara," he pointed at the girl, "and I'm Aang." "So what?" I asked him, not understanding the point of the introductions at the moment. "And he's also our avatar, so you can't be pointing all those metal things at us, because he's the bridge between the worlds." Sokka began to eloquently explain. "Really, an avatar? Doesn't look like the century-old sage who's been hiding and mastering the elements for ages. Maybe we should just check?" I said, and condensing water from the air, I sent an ice needle at the bald young man. Unexpectedly, the boy jumped high, and a strong gust of wind, blowing out of nowhere, lifted him even higher, so the ice needle missed and embedded itself a third into the pole. The warrior's eyes widened. Sokka looked at the ice needle that flew just a couple of centimeters from his face. Katara's gaze shifted from me to the needle, and Aang landed on the pole. "Wow, an airbender, and I thought you all were subjected to a great extermination. What a surprise. So it turns out you're an air nomad? Considering the Avatar, after Avatar Roku's death, should be reborn into an air nomad according to the cycle, it allows for the thought that you really are the Avatar. But it doesn't explain where you've been all these years?" I began to get carried away by the thought that if the Avatar hadn't disappeared for a century, my family would still be alive, as the Fire Nation would never have reached our home. But after a moment, I stopped and calmed down, coming to the realization that such grievances were pointless. My family was avenged, so it was time to accept it and stop ending up in such situations. I looked around. The weapons were lowered. It seemed the warriors realized we were not spies, and now most of them had dispersed. The people, learning about the new incarnation of the Avatar, started to surround us, simply radiating joy. I quickly made my way through them and headed to the warriors. "Sorry, but how about answering my question? We don't train anyone." One of the warriors answered me, turning around, while the others didn't even try to say anything. "Who's talking about training? I don't need training from you. Just a good, preferably the best warrior among you, who would agree to be my sparring partner, that's all." "You want to have a few fights?" she asked, turning fully towards me and seeming interested in my words. No. A few won't interest me at all. I want to have many fights, from which I could gain a lot of benefits. All right. Come by in the evening, show us how good a warrior you are. Glad you agreed. See you in the evening. It was still broad daylight outside, so after talking to the warrior, I headed to the shore. For several weeks now, I've been focused on dedicating time and attention to meditations. I haven't stopped meditating since I got out of prison. The way I escaped, simply making the stone part and then close behind me to prevent the Fire Nation from getting any information about how I escaped, has at least confirmed part of my hypothesis about the potential to master other elements besides my own, without being the Avatar. And since I managed to master earth magic, though it was harder than with water, it means I can master the remaining elements. Fire and air are left. And for quite some time now, I've been dedicating at least 3 hours a day to meditations with fire, focusing on the fire element as I previously did with earth or water. I haven't had any success yet, but it took a lot of time with earth too. On the beach, I gathered twigs, extracted moisture from them, which I immediately poured into the ocean water, and then lit the arranged twigs with a flint. The fire burned, and I sat next to it with closed eyes, detached from the world. I don't know the mechanism behind these meditations, as I don't feel any new sensations related to the new element. Just after some time the element starts to yield, and I manage to control it. And only later do I start to feel the element, or the magic of that element, when I've achieved significant success with it. That's how it was with water. I couldn't feel water, but when I achieved the ability to take life from others, to control people even without a full moon, I suddenly realized I could feel it. Not just feel it, I could sense its location in space. At first, not very clearly. I just knew there was liquid there, that's all. But as I developed, as I advanced my water magic, this awareness became clearer, understanding that it wasn't just water, but water in a barrel, and there was blood, not just water. Several containers of water no longer merged into one spot. Now I could clearly distinguish several jugs or barrels, as well as several people, instead of perceiving them as one entity. I haven't achieved this with earth and think it will be a long time before I do, and with fire, it's even further away. And there, as I focused on the fire, I realized there was someone nearby. And they were approaching. When they got close enough, I could clearly sense the blood, so I easily understood it was a girl. Opening my eyes, I looked at the trees, and a few seconds later, Katara emerged from behind them. Chapter 12, And why did you come after me, Katara? I asked the girl who emerged from behind the trees. You know, we're currently traveling with Aang and Sokka to the North Pole. There, we want to learn waterbending. But, we unexpectedly met you, and you showed that you're very skilled with this bending. I'm a waterbender too, and Aang needs to learn the elements in the order of air, water, earth, fire. It's water's turn now. Could you teach us waterbending? Or at least show us a few lessons that you were taught, she asked, initially a bit shyly but then relaxing. No. I can't. I replied within a couple of seconds, causing her to be a bit taken aback, expecting a different answer. What? But why? It wouldn't cost you anything. Or do you want something in return? She asked. No. The latter is interesting, of course, considering you can't offer me anything interesting since you have nothing, but the problem is elsewhere. Nobody taught me. My brother and I developed our waterbending skills on our own from a young age. Only, my brother died because of the Fire Nation warriors, and I went further, first avenging by killing all the attackers, and then those who killed my family and all dear to me. After that, I continued to develop on my own, surviving alone, using waterbending. Katara, if you want to progress, want to achieve new heights in waterbending, you just have to do it. Don't look for someone to tell and show everything, but independently find approaches, make mistakes and learn from them to avoid repeating them. On my own? But you managed to do it somehow. I understand what you're saying, but wouldn't it be better and faster with a teacher? Please. I looked at her and thought, do I need this? No, absolutely not. It offers me no benefit, and teaching the avatar would surely bring a heap of problems. Why would I need that? No. No. My answer is no, Katara. And don't push it, or I'll show you how waterbending can help get rid of overly persistent individuals. I see. Sorry. Do you mind if I sit here? It's not like I can approach Aang right now anyway. No. Sit down. I continued to focus on the fire, occasionally stirring to add a few more twigs. Katara watched me, but it seemed utterly bewildering to her, as I didn't move at all and just sat in one position hour after hour, doing absolutely nothing but staring into the flames of the fire. "What are you doing?" she eventually couldn't resist asking me, as the sun began to set. A couple more hours and it would be time to head back to the village. Meditating on fire. "Why?" she asked, puzzled. "To learn firebending." "What? But you're not the Avatar. How can you learn firebending as a waterbender?" "Everyone knows that. Everyone only knows what nobody has done, except for the Avatar. I was born to a woman whose ancestors lived in the Southern Water Tribe. However, besides waterbending, I've also managed to master earthbending." "No. That's impossible. Only the Avatar." Without saying anything, I punched the ground, and the patch of earth where I was sitting rose by 30 centimeters. This immediately silenced Katara. But not for long. "How?" "Circumstances forced me. I had to choose, either become an earthbender too, or be burned alive in a stone cage above lava, where I was held for almost a year without food and allowed only 2 sips of water a day. If you want to live, learn to adapt." "You were in prison?" "But for what?" she asked me. "It doesn't matter, Katara. It's irrelevant now. Why? I escaped, killed all the prison staff on my way out, and got free. I don't want to remember those times. They weren't the most pleasant, you know." Katara didn't say another word, and I quietly continued to meditate on the fire until the evening. When I opened my eyes again, I noticed Katara's absence, stood up, extinguished the fire with sand, and headed back to the village. Finding the training hall where the Kyoshi warriors trained wasn't hard. The rhythmic sounds of kata execution were coming from there, quite loudly, so I headed straight there. In the doorway, I noticed Sokka peeping through the window at the training. "What are you peeking at, strongest warrior of the tribe? Or have the hormones kicked in, and you've started peeking at girls due to instincts?" I loudly inquired, quietly approaching from behind. "Hey. Why are you sneaking up? Do you have any idea how much you scared me?" He started to express his emotions, but then, "I mean, be careful, I almost hit you." "Got it. I'll remember to knock you out with a hit to the head next time I approach from behind. Thanks for letting me know." Sokka was taken aback for a moment, but I walked past him and entered. The girls heard our conversation and now were not training but listening attentively to every word. "Hello, girls. I was told I could come here in the evening to spar with one of you. The sun is setting, and here I am." My behavior was a mix of mockery and politeness. After leading a gang that controlled a small town for a year and a half, I somehow really liked to communicate with people mostly in this manner. You could call it a style, or something of the sort. My personal conversational and behavioral style. One of the girls stepped forward. "My name is Suki, I'm the leader of the Kyoshi warriors. And I'll be your sparring partner. If you're ready, we can start." "Will you be using weapons?" she asked. "Actually, I don't really need weapons. If the enemy is at a distance, I can reach them with bending, if close, then with hands and feet. So, I suggest we have a hand-to-hand combat, Suki." "Okay. Start when you're ready. No need to invite me twice." After taking 3 steps forward, I threw my hand forward. Suki caught the hand in a grip, but I bent my knees and squatted, pulling the hand towards me, twisting it in the direction of the thumb of the leading hand of the opponent. Freeing my hand, I struck her shin with my foot, but she jumped back a bit. I rolled over my back and got up in a stance, barely missing her face, but Suki leaned her torso back and kicked me in the face, balancing on one leg. Our fight was almost even. I clearly had a slight advantage in physical parameters over her, while bending made my body more flexible and fast, so in this aspect, I was successfully surpassing the warrior. However, she was a far greater master and excellently compensated for the lack of characteristics with excellent technique. I almost had no technique. Well, I had something. A sort of wushu, slightly modified for water control and movement. This mixed with acrobatics, unnatural movements, and displacements for a human in space, all this allowed me to hold my own against Suki without using bending for a very long time. Until I finally got caught in a single sweep and fell, after which the warrior's fist stopped a centimeter from my nose. Marvelous. I'm impressed. Honestly. That was incredible, Suki. A smile never left my face, even though we were now in a rather interesting position where she was sitting on me, leaned in close, and only her fist near my face indicated that there had been, sort of, a fight. Suki paused and looked around, then back at the smiling me, and after that jumped off me. You fought well. What's your name? I still don't know it. You can call me Joe. But really, my name is Frio. Alright, Frio, you can come here again and I'll be your sparring partner again if none of the other Kyoshu warriors wants to. Suki told me this without turning towards me, so I didn't get up from the floor and watched her in the same lying position. Wonderful. Then I'll come tomorrow morning and we'll repeat the fight. Let's see how many more times I have to lose to you before I start to win properly. Alright, I'm off. If you're looking for me, I'll be somewhere on the shore. Standing up, I headed towards the exit, past Sokka who had watched everything that happened, and pleased with the fight, I went to the beach. Meanwhile, the other Kyoshi warriors stood in the hall and looked at a blushing Suki, but nobody laughed, they just smiled and nothing more. Chapter 13. For several days in a row, all I did was come to the Kyoshi warriors hardly every 2 hours and engage in combat with one of them. It turned out that only 9 warriors posed serious competition to me, 3 of whom defeated me, and Tsuyuki was the best among them, with my other 2 conquerors being Arya and Tina. Despite their excellent resistance and their ability to hold out against me for a long time, the others eventually lost. I fought with all of them in turns. After each battle, I would immerse myself in water and recover there, after which meditation on fire would resume again. As promised, I helped the village with my bending, irrigating the few fields, extracting clean, fresh water, and much more. By the second day, the warriors themselves started asking me frequently to assist them with their injuries if they got any. This was my first practice in healing with water, not just myself, but after a few unsuccessful attempts, fortunately without injuring anyone, everything went smoothly. I heard that there are healer benders at the North Pole. Maybe it really is worth teaching the Avatar and heading to the North Pole? Though why would he need to get to the pole if I am already teaching him? But who knows what else can be learned there? At least healing. In other words, as agreed, I used waterbending for good. Meanwhile, Aang was having fun. Really, he was entertaining and amusing others with his bending and childishness. After all, it's understandable. That's how he was raised, and he is still a child, so there's nothing surprising about it. But when you think of the Avatar, somehow you expect something different. The other members of the trio were busy with their own things. Katara was at the beach and started trying to control water, and she even succeeded to some extent. My brother and I had exactly the same successes at the beginning, until we began to understand some rules, which allowed us to move forward. Sokka only watched our fights with the Kyoshu warriors and their training until after lunch the next day, and then he stepped in and asked Tsuyuki to teach him to be a warrior. Oh, what started after that? They even dressed him in women's clothing as a joke. Why doesn't he wear your clothes? He is also. Sokka began asking Tsuyuki, but I interrupted him. No bro, I'm not training here, just fighting. A fighter can be in any clothes. In war, you don't point out your enemy's inappropriate attire. But training, you don't bring your own rules into someone else's monastery, you know. Hee hee. I laughed, watching the scene. However, Sokka overcame this and began to train. It even caused involuntary respect in my eyes. A little. One day, I even managed to see the legendary Anagi, a huge water serpent. I saw it when Aang, for fun and show, tried to ride it. It didn't work, but the giant sea serpent showed itself in all its glory. It had smooth dark brown skin and many narrow sharp fins, running like a crest along the entire back of the serpent. Even from the village, its bright green eyes were visible, and in its mouth, a large number of sharp teeth. On the head of the serpent, there is a large fin that can fold. Just behind the head are 4 bright yellow, vertical stripes. The Anagi also has 2 long whiskers. And it can also release a powerful jet of water from its mouth, under immense pressure. In the evening, after another fight with Sayuki, which I almost managed to win, I headed to the very bay where this very sea serpent resides. The bay was quite large, it was quiet and peaceful here. I made a fire on the shore and calmly continued another meditation. It lasted quite long. The moon already shone brightly in the sky, stars colored the firmament, and rare dark spots moved across the sky, covering the light of the stars. Those were clouds. Then I heard a splash of water. In the silence of the night, this sound was especially loud to me, as even the sounds of insects around were absent. I opened my eyes and looked at the source. In the water, in the night's darkness, nothing was visible. There was no wind, no disturbance. The water was calm and at night, like a mirror, reflected the entire sky. And only the ripples spreading across the water indicated that there was indeed water here. In the moonlight, it was visible how the water, once again, swelled up, and then, with a weak explosion of splashes, released the tip of the tail of the giant sea serpent. The Anagi. Initially, I came here just for meditation, but this beach, due to the day's events, imprinted in my mind, stood out, and therefore I came here specifically. Now, seeing that the Anagi was not asleep, my interest in it became more than great. Moving away from the fire, I extinguished it with a small stream of water. I looked at the water and noticed that here and there, again and again, the water was ready to explode, bursting into splashes, but what pushed the water from below only barely reached the surface, but seldom came out of the water. The Anagi was either hunting or just swimming underwater, not intending to come out. Standing a bit on the shore, almost touching the water, I stretched my hands forward and concentrated. Nothing happened and there was no effect, at least it seemed so from the outside. A few minutes later, I lowered my hands and felt a drop of sweat trickle down my temple, and I was breathing deeply. When I strain like this, even control over bodily processes gives up and yields. Too far, I said to myself, need to get closer. However, no need to get closer arose, nor was I sure about this idea, when from the water with tremendous force, the serpent burst out, which almost immediately focused its gaze on me, then opened its mouth and I saw how within seconds, a water orb formed in its throat. In an instant, this orb turned into a powerful stream of water, which under immense pressure rushed towards me. I stepped back with one foot and extended my hands with palms together in front of me, then abruptly spread them to the sides. Obedient to me, the water, almost reaching me, parted to the sides and hit the ground on both sides of me. Yeah, probably shouldn't have tried to take its blood under control. It seems it really didn't like that. I made 2 sharp hand movements and from the water shot out 2 clumps of water, which immediately sharpened and turned into ice, but they were instantly knocked down by a new stream from the Anagi. It seems that this is not his physiological body abilities, but rather his waterbending, like dragons have firebending, or like the flying bison I saw with Aang. Alright, need to finish with the Anagi quickly, preferably without killing, as that might not be liked by many here. Again and again, dodging the powerful water streams from the serpent, which literally created water in its mouth, at some point, catching a moment between attacks, I created water tentacles, which by the dozens entwined the serpent. Paradoxically, the larger the volume, the easier it is to control, after crossing a certain threshold. The opposite is also true. After a certain volume, it's extremely difficult to control a small amount of water. And if in the second case everything is decided by control, then in the first the most important thing is strength. If you have the strength, you can create water tentacles as big as the onagi itself. I clearly don't have enough strength for that yet, but I have enough to entwine the serpent and not let it move too much. Despite having entwined the serpent, it was extremely difficult to continue holding it. I began to feel phantom fatigue somewhere inside, inexplicable pains, but I continued to hold the serpent. After about 7 minutes, the serpent calmed down and stopped thrashing, so I started to remove the tentacles from it one by one, preparing for new, rightly, in some way, aggressive actions towards me. But when I removed the last holding tentacle, the serpent just looked at me attentively and then dived into the water. Beautifully and neatly dived, practically without splashes. Looking at the waters of the bay a bit more, I lay down on the sand and right there, without moving, fell asleep under the light of the moon and stars in a completely windless weather. I'm still too early to subdue such monsters. Not even sure if I could kill it. Feeling pain, somewhere deep inside me, I closed my eyes and fell asleep. Chapter 14. When I woke up in the morning and tried to use bending, I felt a slight tension inside me, a reminder of yesterday's reckless act. It's good, very good, that my attempt to use bloodbending ended well, and I remained alive. That's truly wonderful. Another good thing is that everything was resolved without killing the onagi, which, in a way, protects this island. I headed to the village again, wishing to fight the warriors. I also saw Sokka, who was actively training, although he was being taught more about the essence of the Kyoshu warriors' fighting style. Using the opponent's strength against them. Sounds easy and understandable, but in practice, it's very hard to use, which Sokka was learning. I adopted some techniques from them, though I didn't change my own style. Actually, I don't have a style as such yet. The fight went excellently. I managed to defeat Tina by catching her dodging from a low to high strike. As she moved aside, I was able to hit her shin, immediately knocking her down and marking the finish. Now only 2 warriors, Arya and Suki, remained undefeated by me. But nothing, their turn will come someday. By noon, I headed to the village again, resting and relaxing in the water on one of the shores, but when I returned, I saw a very unpleasant scene. "Where is the Avatar?" "I know you're hiding him here," shouted some fire warrior. No, now I clearly felt that he was a firebending, though judging by myself, being a warrior does not hinder him, on the contrary, it only helps. "The Avatar is not here," shouted someone from the crowd of people gathered. "Go away from here, firebenders." "So you don't want to do this the easy way," again shouted this firebenders, judging by his hairstyle and the absence of a helmet, the different style of his attire, and his demeanor, this was someone from the Fire Nation aristocracy. "Then we'll do it the hard way." With those words, he made a quick motion, extending his hand towards the crowd, and released a stream of fire. I don't know where Aang and the rest of his company were at that moment, but I definitely didn't want any deaths among the locals. They hadn't done anything good for me, but they hadn't done anything bad either. And Arya and Suki are from here. It would be terrible if their relatives, close ones, and so on, died in the fire of benders, like my mother. A push of the earth to my feet and my own jump gave me enough speed to intercept the firebender. My reaction and thinking accelerated, and it seemed like everything was in slow motion. Only 2 thoughts flashed through my mind: water or earth? Which element to use? My main element is water, and I'm much more skilled with it, with a lot of combat experience, whereas with earth, I'm not as good. My skills in this bending are also excellent, though far from water, but they would have been more than enough for me. However, in combat, I'm not used to using earth, and so now, it's dangerous to do so. So what's the problem? Use waterbending. But there's one catch. I don't have water with me. I don't sense any bodies of water, nor containers of water within a reasonable distance for defense against fire. Condense it from the air? I won't make it. Extract it from plants? I would manage to extract more water than from the air, but the ground around here is trampled and there's hardly any grass. Bloodbending is not suitable. I need to defend against fire now, not control the opponent. My thoughts raced instantaneously, but it wasn't enough, and now I was in the path of the fiery charge, heading straight for me, landing on the ground. I felt my eyelids slowly closing, and the image was fading. I was about to use earth to create a stone wall, but realized I wouldn't make it in time. The speed of raising a wall from the earth wasn't fast enough to block the fire, which was already 3 meters away from me. My eyelids were just about to open. And I felt it. I felt the flame coming towards me. I felt the bending flowing within it. I felt fire. I opened my eyes and saw bright flames before me. I raised my hands up and down and made a half-turn with them, followed by a spiral, and the fire just dispersed, deformed, and dissipated. Time flowed at its normal speed, and I felt my chest burning. My breathing was deep, like after a marathon at sprint speed, and my hands still felt the heat they had almost touched. The bender who had fired at the people froze and stared at me. Now I was in front of him and could see him, having previously seen only his right side. He was a young man my age. Part of his head was bald, and only a piece of his head had hair, which was tied in a braid. Otherwise, his face had no distinctive features, if not for a huge burn scar on his face, framing his left half of the face, passing over his eye, and making it always squinted, as well as a quarter of his face. "And who are you?" the firebender said with barely contained anger. "A firebender. A traitor. A deserter. I'm not a firebender and never have been. But maybe I'll become one." "And who are you, butt-faced jerk?" I calmly asked, condensing more water from the air. Thankfully, the ocean, being close by, contributes to high humidity, so in a few seconds, familiar water tentacles formed in my hands. "You'll pay for your words," shouted the bender. "I am Prince Zuko, the heir to Fire Lord Ozai. An exiled heir, as far as I know. Sent to find the Avatar to return to his daddy's side." I took a combat stance and felt the water ready to respond to my will at any moment. It will be interesting to see if royal training differs from that of the ordinary fire warriors I've killed by the hundreds and built my favorite meat compositions from. "What?" Zuko wanted to ask something, but I dashed forward and shot a tentacle with a tip turned into a long, sickle-shaped ice blade. The prince dodged to the side, but it still grazed him, and the armor he wore got a cut from the blade, which also almost appeared on his chest. However, the blade continued its motion and simply bisected a fire warrior standing behind Zuko. I pulled myself with a water tentacle to that spot and, extending a second tentacle, made it sharp, and with a swing, I slashed through 3 more warriors who had come and immediately jumped up, dodging Prince Zuko's fire projectiles. I had to roll far to the side to dodge a huge stream of flame that wanted to sweep me away with its power. However, having dodged, I did the same as Zuko had done earlier, and the fire hit one of the houses, which immediately caught fire. 2 hand movements and the water flies off my hands, turning into a cloud of steam. Despite the steam's temperature, it still extinguishes the flame, and in the meantime, I leap over a wave of fire sent from Zuko's foot and start closing the distance. The fiery clumps that the prince sent my way in mass were beaten and shattered against the ground, failing to find me. Excellent agility is an irreplaceable ally in this. With a final burst, I found myself right in front of the bender and delivered a spinning kick, but he ducked and tried to hit me in the shin. However, I spun and lifted my other leg off the ground, hanging in the air for a moment, then delivered a downward kick to Prince Zuko's head. If he didn't lose consciousness, he would certainly be disoriented for a while and unable to continue the fight. He'd have trouble standing up. And though bending strengthens the body, I'm not just an ordinary person either, but a bender's. I land on the ground with a roll and look around. At this moment, the Kyoshi warriors were fighting the fire warriors, with Suki, Arya, and Tina taking on the benders, while several other warriors teamed up to attack a few more benders. I focus and extend my hands towards them, then forcefully clench my fists, and 8 troublesome benders freeze. Expressions of terrible agony and pain appear on their faces, and then they fall and move no more. Now the warriors would have more strength for the rest. Well, I pick out targets and, raising my leg high, deliver a heel strike to the ground, causing a dent in the trampled earth matching the shape of a heel, and 12 fire warriors unexpectedly impaled themselves on stone spikes that shot up from the ground. Meanwhile, water began to gather in the air, and I turned around, intending to encase Zuko in ice, but upon turning, I saw an empty spot. Prince Zuko was nowhere to be seen. How? I had lost sight of him for only about 20 seconds. I didn't feel any movement, didn't hear the sounds of a rising body. How? The battle with the Fire Nation's people wasn't easy, and before I killed the firebenders, they had managed to set several houses on fire, which were now actively burning, with a few neighboring ones starting to catch fire as well. I was about to use the steam technique again, which had proven effective, but before I could do so, Unagi leaped out of the water in the bay, with Aang on its head holding the sea serpent by its whiskers, and the next second, the serpent released a stream of water towards the village, turning it into rain that quickly extinguished the fire. The Kyoshi warriors dealt with the remaining fire warriors. I quickly learned from one of the living defeated where their ship was docked. Fortunately, these warriors had already somehow figured out who I was. More precisely, they connected rumors, fleeting descriptions, and the current me and came to disheartening conclusions for them, so one of them answered my question immediately. I reached the required shore in just 15 minutes but only saw the ship, already too far away, heading east. They escaped. Chapter 15. So, what does it mean, not only the Avatar can master all the elements? Sokka asked me, out of the blue starting the conversation. But why doesn't everyone do this? Why do people only master one element? Sokka, I have no idea. Maybe it's because of laziness, or perhaps some other reason. Ask your sister why she doesn't try to master air or firebending. I haven't even mastered water yet, and it's always been said that only the Avatar can. Katara began. Yes, only the Avatar can master all the elements. Rigidity of thought is one of the reasons. I don't know everything, but it seems to me that the Avatar's equal predisposition to all elements is provided by his avatarhood, and according to the legends, he has the knowledge and experience of all his past incarnations. By the way, Aang, I've always wondered what or whom are you the Avatar of? I turned to Aang, who had been listening to our conversation and after my question turned around and hopped over to our seating nest. What do you mean? Aang asked me, clasping his legs with his hands and smiling broadly. Well, Avatar means descent, incarnation into something or someone. Since you're the Avatar, it means you are some incarnation of someone who makes you the Avatar and allows you to easily learn all elements, or his embodiment. I'm curious, of whom? Being the embodiment of whom, do you receive such starting bonuses as the knowledge and wisdom of all past lives and a simultaneous inclination to all elements? After all, it must be someone very unusual and probably very powerful, because the Avatar is the one who alone maintains and protects the world with balance. My mentors never told me about this, and I never really thought about it, so I don't know. The answer was clear. A child of his age would hardly be interested in such information. So, what about mastering different elements? How did you manage that? And how did you even become a bender? Sokka asked again. There's a saying, curiosity killed the cat. Be careful, or in my sleep, I might think your name is Cat and accidentally rip something off you definitely don't need. I looked seriously at Sokka, and he instinctively grabbed his nose. Then, as I shifted my gaze lower, he, wide-eyed, started to protect something more important. As for your question, I simply had no choice. Since childhood, I mastered water, not to brag, just for the record, so to speak. My mother called me a genius in waterbending. Though neither she nor her ancestors demonstrated any bending ability in water for several generations, so it's unclear by what standards she measured, but she never doubted her words. I mastered water and ice long ago, when my brother was still alive, later gained notoriety as a maniac butcher, which wasn't far from the truth, spent some time living as a pickpocket in one of the Earth Kingdom cities, mastering water to a high level, I believe. Traveling and hiding, I also successfully mastered steam. It's much harder, but the power is greater. especially the destructive power. Living in the woods for a while, I tried to find new aspects of waterbending and one day discovered the ability to control blood. This, by the way, was a main argument for sparing my life when I was captured by the Fire Nation people. I don't know what they wanted to do with me next, but bloodbending was clearly needed for something. After bloodbending, I learned to extract water from plants and living beings' blood, control plants. I actively used all this in confrontation with the Fire Nation. To be honest, I couldn't care less about them, but, still, even though I didn't care about the war, I feel a dislike towards the Fire Nation people. Yes, I killed the murderers of my family, but the dislike for the Fire Nation remained. So, whenever possible, I built up my reputation. A reputation as a monster to be feared. However, all this reputation was destroyed when I was captured. When those captured Fire Nation warriors were interrogated, it didn't seem like they weren't afraid of you. It looked like they were ready to faint right there at the sight of you. Sokka's words were true. I was present during the interrogations of the firebenders, and in my presence, they answered as quickly as possible, begging the warriors not to hand them over to me. It seemed they were so scared that even the local residents started to treat me warily. And everyone remembers how I dealt with the soldiers. Even some of the Kyoshi warriors began to look at me more often with a hint of doubt in their eyes and on their faces. For my capture, for the ambush specifically for me, they sent 250 people, among whom were very good benders and warriors. However, only 16 people returned alive then, and it's not certain that they were healthy and without injuries. All the others, they will never return anywhere. So, although I was defeated, it was a Pyrrhic victory that came at too high a price for them. Yes, I was captured, but in the process, they only reinforced my reputation as a bloodthirsty monster. And what a stir in the Fire Nation society the news of my escape from prison caused, which was almost individually designed and built for me. And I destroyed the entire guard garrison there, which seemed like they were protecting the Fire Lord's family, not an enemy benders. After that, my reputation not just grew. According to rumors that reached me, it skyrocketed. In the Fire Nation, I'm practically used to scare children, hee hee. I laughed and looked at the serious Sokka, Katara, and Aang. That's not funny. You killed so many? Sokka asked. And haven't you killed, Sokka? You're a hunter, meaning a gatherer and killer of your prey. It's not the same. To me, it's very similar. No, maybe I'm wrong, all that's happened has clearly affected my brain and changed something in me, making my view of the surroundings different from the standard, but sorry. In my view, the people and the animals you killed are the same. But people are. Katara began. What? What about people? Are they rational? Have personality? Self-aware? What is so fundamentally different about them from animals? Some animals can use bending just like us, albeit differently, but they can, and there are animals that make you think you're the brainless beast when communicating with them. We, humans, are just selfish creatures. Every action or inaction of ours carries the goal of gaining benefit. Even if it seems to you that it's from the heart and you're doing it just because, it's just self-deception. You do it to satisfy your self-esteem and then think, ah, how good I am, I did it just because. I'm not blaming you, Katara, I'm the same as are Sokka and Aang. We all are humans, we have our instincts, desires, and whims. And all this matters. So, killing a human is no different from killing an animal. The process and the outcome are the same. And killing a human is considered bad only because of the opinion imposed by upbringing and societal norms. So yes, Sokka, I have killed, and I've killed very many. The number of people I've killed has already exceeded many hundreds. I didn't keep count, so I can't say for sure. And yet, it's not right to kill people. In the temple, they told me that every killing of a person slightly kills the person inside. It only makes things worse. In that case, I'm already doomed, Aang. I've personally and brutally killed so many that I should have rotted from the inside out. And if so, it can hardly get worse. However, if it's so important to you, when given the choice to leave a person who can't do anything to me or to kill him, I will try to choose the former. Alright, we've strayed from the topic of our conversation. Sokka, where was I? I asked the guy. You said you escaped from a prison that was specially prepared for you. But how? He asked again. That prison was indeed perfect. I had not a single chance to escape from it, no matter how many plans I came up with, all of them shattered against the harsh reality. I was helpless. As one of my overseers said, no water bending would help me get out of that prison. That became the final straw, and I gave up. I stopped even thinking about finding a way to escape using water bending. However, it became clear to me, if not by water, then try by earth. I had only a hypothesis, which suggested that perhaps originally benders didn't master elements, or mastered all of them, but, depending on various circumstances, they had to choose one element for themselves and focus on it. Through many generations, this resulted in a huge potential in that element for their descendants, but almost complete inability in other elements. I don't know if I was right about the history. Maybe the legendary lion turtles were involved, or perhaps all the inhabitants of the world are aliens from another world, who knows? However, I follow the essence of the hypothesis: a bender can master another element. The question is how much time it will take. And I had plenty of time. Day and night, almost without interruption, I tried to start controlling Earth. Later, as I promised, I'll try to teach you, Katara and Aang, the same. If Sokka wants, I'll teach him too. Maybe he's also a bender, just it hasn't manifested yet. 9 to 10 months later, the first successes appeared. And then? Aang asked. That prison was created with the assumption that you're a waterbender, no matter how good, but a waterbender. However, it completely did not anticipate that you could also control Earth. Previously you had not demonstrated such ability, so no one could have imagined it. That's how you escaped, right? Sokka finished the story of the escape for me. Correct, Sokka, well done. You do have brains after all. You're not hopeless. Maybe you'll even find a girl for yourself in the future, No longer looking at Katara quietly laughing, the smiling Aang, and the blushing Sokka, I looked towards the vast expanses of the Earth Kingdom below us. It's very convenient to have a flying bison. Very convenient indeed. I must admit. Chapter 16, surrounded by hills and mountains, partly covered with snow and partly with grass, the hilly terrain created a beautiful impression of the surrounding areas. There it is, the great Earth Kingdom, and its city Omashu. Aang announced triumphantly, running ahead of all of us to the next hill and turning to face us. Following him, we climbed up, myself, Katara, and Sokka. From the hill, we had an excellent view of one of the most famous and greatest cities of the Earth Kingdom. The city, located on a large, steep hill or small mountain, had its walls running right up to the edge, and a long, narrow, slightly winding bridge about 5 to 6 meters wide, crossing a huge chasm, connected the city to the rest of the mountains and hills. Wow! They don't build cities like that on the South Pole, said Katara. I completely agreed. In my previous life, people achieved incredible feats in architecture without bending, and ever more advanced materials allowed the creation of structures unimaginable to the locals. However, compared to everything I've seen in this world, Omashu truly stands out with its grandeur, monumentality, and apparent impregnability. I wondered, what does Ba Sing Se look like then? I pictured in my head images of huge and unconquerable cities with massive walls and vast areas, while Aang headed towards the city, but Katara stopped him. Wait, Aang, if we just walk in like this, they might recognize you as the Avatar. It could be dangerous, she said. Earthbenders are undoubtedly a great force, but Aang is the Avatar, after all. And what's so dangerous about it? The city hasn't been taken over by the Fire Nation, so there's none of them there, and the Earth Nation will only help us, I believe. Besides, aren't we headed to the North Pole? Why stop here? I asked. Well, last time I was here, my friend Bumi came up with a way to use Omashu's postal system differently. He said that looking at these mail chutes, he sees the coolest slides with steep descents and the best curves. Aang replied. Ah, I see. But what if we get caught? Or at least if they try to? What will we do? Meekly surrender or fight our way out? If we're going to fight, is it worth ruining our relationship with the city just for a ride on the slides? And if we surrender, what then? I asked one question after another. Don't worry about it, Joe. I'm the Avatar. Aang replied with a smile. Aang, he's right. We can't take such risks. What if we really get caught? It would be very bad to say you're the Avatar and try to avoid punishment that way. Sokka supported me, after a moment of thought. This guy keeps impressing me with his brains. Well, okay. Maybe we can just go into the city? We need to buy food anyway, since we didn't take anything from Kyoshi Island and we're about to run out. Katara chimed in. Yes, exactly. Aang lit up with enthusiasm. We'll just go in for food and that's it. Let's go, Joe, Sokka. Sokka and I exchanged looks and realized we were thinking the same thing, which made us both look somewhat sad at the same time. This is definitely not going to end well. Alright, but remember, if this visit goes badly and they try to catch us, I won't let anyone take me without a fight. A very bloody and brutal fight, Aang, in my favorite style, sparing no one and regretting nothing. Do you understand, Aang? I warned the Avatar very seriously. Both he and Katara lost their smiles after my words, and the fire of enthusiasm in their eyes was gone. Sokka, however, was looking at them, squinting his eyes significantly. I'll make sure nothing happens, Joe. But you don't kill anyone. I won't kill anyone just like that. At most, I'll cripple someone if there's a reason. A particularly brutal killing in a supposedly neutral city isn't the best start, you agree? But if the city becomes hostile, well, I've already said all I need to. I was serious and didn't sugarcoat anything, so all three of them just nodded. After walking a few meters, Katara suddenly remembered that we should disguise Aang. We couldn't think of anything better than to use Appas, the Avatar's 10-ton flying bison, fur to make a semblance of gray hair and thick gray mustaches. How itchy this all is. And how do you even live with fur? Aang asked his bison, who just snorted and blew such a powerful stream of air that Aang was nearly blown away. So, we headed down the seemingly not very wide stone path to the city. The path was actually quite wide enough for 2 carts with a pair of oxen each to pass each other without any hindrance, but against the backdrop of the huge chasm, the path felt narrow and quite frightening. Upon our arrival at the city gates, just as some guy with a cabbage cart was let in. The gates immediately slid shut behind him, revealing that it was a solid wall, constantly opened and closed by earthbenders. At the entrance, one of the earthbenders made a couple of motions and raised a huge boulder above our heads, threatening to drop it at any moment. And who might you be? What business do you have? Asked the earthbender holding the boulder. Aang stepped forward unexpectedly, displaying incredible acting skills and fully immersing himself in the role of an old man, which, in fact, he is. After all, he's 112 years old, which is insanely old for a normal person. My business, young man, is none of your concern. Poking the staff into the Bender gatekeeper's chest and face, Aang started his performance. I stood a bit aside, watching everything unfold with a bit of curiosity. Honestly, I couldn't have immersed myself in the role as well as he did. Simply top-notch. In just a few minutes, we were inside the city, and the massive walls closed behind us, erasing all traces of the passage. Erasing the passage itself. Sokka, I'll go check out the market, see what I can find, and you keep an eye on these two. I hardly trust their judgment. And you, I turned to Katara and Aang, well, I've already mentioned what could happen. So, for the sake of the local law enforcement and civilians, don't turn the city against us. Chapter 17, in Omashu, there was so much to see, especially the local market and shops. Despite the Fire Nation taking everything I had upon my capture, I had managed to save up some money on my way south. After all, I had to stop in villages and towns, and my skills as a burglar, pickpocket, and bear-baiter hadn't gone anywhere. Now, I had a small bag of coins, quite a substantial amount for someone who wasn't a business owner, a successful and experienced trader, or the son of some aristocrat. Inside the wallet, I kept a layer of water under my control that protected my money from theft. At the market, which I reached after 20 to 30 minutes of searching and walking around the city, there were many goods, but mostly food and some other daily necessities. I wandered around the market for about 40 minutes, gradually filling a basket with groceries and spices. Herbs are great, but some spices can't be replaced by them. For example, ground and specially treated hot pepper. I don't know why, but I had developed a taste for spicy and hot food, so cooking with garlic sauce, pepper additive, or something of that sort had become routine for me. I thought about treating my companions to a steak with something very spicy. Though Aang was immediately out of luck, he doesn't eat meat. Well, more for me then. However, my thoughts about which spicy seasoning to add to the food and how to use bending in cooking were interrupted by something. This something turned out to be 3 teenagers a couple of years younger than me, each familiar to me, who just raced past me, smashing a couple of stalls in the process while sitting in a stone cart, or something very similar to it. "I'm disappointed in you, Sokka." Chaos ensued around, and taking advantage of the situation, I quickly snatched a couple of wallets and disappeared into the crowd. If there's one thing I'd learned in my thieving career, it was how to vanish into a crowd very quickly. It was probably the first skill I had to master to avoid causing a slaughter of the city guards. I thought, after such an incident, the city would be flooded with those looking for me. Moving to areas with fewer people, I waited for a moment when no one was watching and used an earthbending boosted jump to land on a rooftop. The trail of dust left by my companions made it easy to follow them, so I quickly headed towards the farthest dust cloud, able to cover the distances between buildings with a running start and jumps. Using bloodbending to relieve fatigue and slightly enhance my body, it took about 10 minutes of fast running and rooftop jumping to reach the destination. However, I found only the remains of a wooden cart and a heap of cabbage crushed by a wheelless stone cart. Neither the cart's owner with the cabbage nor Aang, Katara, and Sokka were anywhere to be found. After asking around, I learned that the city guard, consisting of earthbenders, had already arrested and taken away all 4 of them. My 3 companions and the cabbage cart owner. And what happens to the captured criminals afterward? I asked the last person I spoke with. They are judged by the ruler of Omashu, King Bumi. Hearing this, I turned and looked towards the palace at the city's summit, the largest and most majestic building in the city. After watching it for a couple of minutes, I headed towards the palace, simultaneously mapping out the city in my head in case of a chase. Thus, it took me about 3 hours to reach the palace, and another 40 minutes to scout it. The building was enormous and incomparable to any other residential houses or municipal buildings in the city. Circling the building, I found several ways to get inside, even without using earthbending, in which I was no master but had more than enough skill for simple manipulations. Waiting for nightfall, I took a small supply of water with me and set off on my mission. Controlling water allows you to give it special properties through bending and use it in a variety of ways. In this case, I used the water to pull myself up by extending it to cling to a window, then pulled myself towards the window, grabbed it with my hand, and with one step, jumped through the window frame. Inside, crystals illuminated the corridors with a greenish light, and I found myself at a corner of the corridor, right on the turn. Listening to the blood within me, I sensed that no one was close by and slowly started moving towards what I thought should lead me to the palace's center, although I could be wrong. I was completely unfamiliar with the palace's architecture and could end up wandering for a long time. As I navigated through the palace, I had a few close calls. The first time was when I encountered the local doors, or rather the lack thereof. In the walls were places with relatively thin stone walls, and earthbenders simply controlled the stone, removing and replacing the wall behind them. At one point, I felt someone's approach behind a wall and didn't think much of it until they started manipulating earthbending. In a panic, I jumped up, using water to attach myself to the ceiling and walls, freezing myself in place with the water I brought. I watched as an earthbender calmly emerged from the wall, which then sealed itself behind him. After waiting a few minutes and sensing the guard moving away, I continued on my way. Another time, I nearly got caught by an overly attentive earthbender who almost discovered me. I was ready to kill him, turning one of the water tendrils into something like a mantis claw made of ice, ready to strike, but he turned away and continued on his path. After waiting a bit, I exhaled and moved on through the corridors. How long did I wander those corridors? Around 4 hours, until I arrived at a breakfast room. Deciding to wait there, I climbed onto the ceiling and waited on the ice, keeping myself awake and motivated with bloodbending. It became clear I could wander for a very long time without finding my party, so I decided to wait there, hoping King Bumi would come to this luxurious hall. Hanging from the ceiling and doing practically nothing, I pondered various things, particularly about bending. I wondered how it is that an earthbender can control earth, stone, and even crystals, as I learned at the market, yet not lava. Why is that? Perhaps it's the same phenomenon as with steam being much harder for me to control than water or ice initially. It's a different state, requiring entirely different control. Indeed, I hadn't met any bender who could control an element through sheer will alone. Movements were always involved. Perhaps due to the difference in the element state, earthbending movements are not suitable for controlling it. Maybe waterbending movements, but with earth energy, would be more appropriate unless you proceed as I do. Now, with plenty of time to think, I revisited the questions Katara and Sokka asked me. Why don't other benders master other elements if it's possible? Several thoughts come to mind. First is the belief in the impossibility of mastering other elements. From birth, training, to old age, they only know that only the Avatar can master all elements, while others are restricted to one. This belief is an absolute truth for them, not easily disproven on their own. Second is the process's speed. I didn't have a teacher or someone to guide me as others did, so I had to forge my own path. Perhaps if I had a teacher, I might have mastered waterbending faster. It took my brother and me over a year to control a mere droplet of water using my methods. But now, dare anyone call me a weak waterbender to my face? Then prove it by surviving after that. My path to mastering bending doesn't rely on gestures. Perhaps these gestures and movements prompt the bending within us to act according to certain algorithms, requiring almost no willpower and making mastery almost instantaneous. I focus on the element and I don't know how to explain it. If I were to use analogies, though they are also awkward, in short, during meditations, I somehow make something inside me, possibly the source of bending or the chi itself, adjust to the desired element. Not just adjust, but become like it. The first time was the hardest. It took over half a year before I even understood what I was trying to achieve with those meditations, and only then did the process begin. Slowly, gradually, but with each session, I became more and more synchronized with the element. The first time was the most difficult. After that, achieving the necessary vibration of energy becomes easy, and it's just a matter of training the element itself. If we disregard the wasted time, I meditated on water for just 9 months, 5 to 6 hours a day. In the cage, I meditated on earth for the same period, almost around the clock, even replacing sleep with trance. When mastering bending through movements, you develop synchronization and then the element itself. This doesn't work with foreign elements. For foreign elements, you first need to achieve synchronization, then develop it. Benders initially have high synchronization with their element, and a few sessions bring it to the necessary level. Or emotional peaks, like what happened to me on Kyoshi Island. I hadn't achieved synchronization with fire, but the peak of emotions allowed me to reach the necessary level for the first time, and I managed to neutralize Zuko's fire, though it took a lot of energy. Probably because I was unaccustomed to it. But just emotions won't do anything. You need great synchronization for emotions to help make a leap in development. Third is dispersion. Regular benders aren't avatars, and bending doesn't come to them with great ease, so it's easier and more practical for them to become stronger in their element than to spend a vast amount of time and energy mastering another element at any level. Thus, a bender initially needs to realize or at least accept the possibility of mastering another element. After that, a significant amount of free time is required, ideally in conditions where there's no alternative, as was my case in my personal prison. Following that, mastering a new element becomes easier. Perhaps the experience and realization after mastering the second element make it seem more achievable. That's how I ended up under these conditions, becoming the first non-avatar to master more than one element. I had to interrupt my numerous reflections as an elderly man entered the room, his face marked with age spots, his hair, eyebrows, and partially covered left eye all thick and gray. As the city of Omashu's king was right beneath me, I melted the ice and descended. Here I was, 10 centimeters above the floor, my water already extending forward, transforming the ends of the tendrils into mantis-like ice blades stretching towards the old man's neck. In a flash, I covered the short distance, landing softly on the floor, stopping the blade millimeters from the old skin. And now! I began to whisper to the old man, but was cut off. Without a word, the old man swiftly and speedily raised his hand, knocking mine away, and stomped his heel on the floor. My eyes widened as I realized a simple truth: King Bumi is an earthbender. And apparently a very experienced one. A huge chasm opened right under my feet, into which I started to fall, but I spread my legs forward and back, touching the ground, and immediately a stone slab rose beneath me, supporting me. Then, I received a blow to the chest from the old man's elbow. I was thrown not too far, about 3 meters, but breathing became difficult, and it felt like a weight had been dropped on my chest from a couple of meters up. Struggling to breathe, holding back tears of pain, and assuming a stance, my arms transformed into tendrils of water. "Oh, and who do we have here?" the old man asked, straightening up, visually growing taller by a head, and broadening his shoulders. He shed his robe to reveal not a frail old man, but a seriously well-built body with impressively powerful muscles. "You've come for me, have you?" After these words, the king stomped on the floor, and a boulder about 1.5 times the size of my head tore out of the floor and hovered beside him. "And how lucky am I?" I asked in a whisper, hoarsely, through the pain in my chest that had slightly subsided. Chapter 18. The boulder flying towards me splits into 5 parts under the guidance of my water tendrils, which then transform into an ice spear flying towards the king. A wall of earth rises in front of him, into which the spear embeds. With a command of my will, the spear instantly transforms into steam, condensing into a small orb. Another command and the orb explodes, unleashing its force towards the wall, demolishing it and creating a shockwave that, as I sensed, knocked down the king as well. I immediately cease the attack and focus for a moment. Instinctively, my hand reaches forward, and Bumi freezes in midair. Bloodbending requires a moment to concentrate and focus before the opponent is brought under control. I wonder, could another waterbender also using bloodbending break free from my control, or from the control of any bloodbender? I've never encountered such incidents. And can a regular bender overcome such control? I pulled Bumi closer and then spread him out in midair. I saw and felt his resistance to my control, and I must admit, it was quite substantial. I then twisted the old man's arms, a gruesome and unpleasant sound accompanying the action. "Old man, tell me where Aang, Katara, and Sokka are. If you tell me quickly, I swear I'll do you no harm, just put you to sleep so you won't interfere with our peaceful and non-lethal departure from your city. So, for your own good and the good of your city and its inhabitants, I advise and strongly recommend you listen to me." I spoke in a quiet, relaxed, soothing voice, ceasing to cause Bumi pain. I genuinely bear no ill will towards earthbenders, so I have no desire to kill them. Even with firebenders and their soldiers, my actions are more out of thought inertia. Though, deep down, I still remember the corpses of my village's inhabitants, my mother's burnt body, and my older brother bleeding out. "Aha! So you're here for Aang. You must be Joe, whom he told me about," he asked cheerfully, his smile missing many teeth. My hand automatically flew to my face. This young idiot told about me to the whole local king, just great. I felt like swearing. Never mind. Where are they? I began to twist the old man's right arm. Answer quickly. Do you think you have the strength? He asked in a squeaky old voice, then continued. I've heard about you. You're the killer, the maniac who became infamous north of Omashu for murdering Fire Nation people with particular cruelty, becoming the only known bloodbender. There's much talk about you. Are you really going to be Aang's waterbending teacher? Yes, he can learn a lot from you. They even say you're the best of all current waterbenders. And I see direct proof of that. But don't worry, I have no intention of harming Aang and his friends. After all, he's my friend too. It's been 100 years since we last saw each other, but he was and remains my friend, so I wish him all the best. I'm only holding them because I want to teach him an important lesson. I want him to understand it himself. It's for his own good. And he won't come to any harm. I know my friend and what he's capable of. So, let me go and don't worry. You've proven yourself a strong bender. I won't send my people after you. I don't want their deaths. Hearing King Bumi's monologue, I pondered for a moment and then released the bloodbending grip, allowing him free movement while still being ready to take control again. But nothing happened. The old earthbender walked barefoot to his discarded clothes, calmly dressed, then approached a table and began eating the food that had been brought about 15 minutes ago. Listening to my senses and feeling no one around, I couldn't understand where all the guards were. After all, this is the king. The city's leader. Where was his numerous guard? Even the criminal leaders I had killed had numerous guards. And yet, I sensed no one around. Patiently waiting, I watched Bumi eat some salad. Soon after he finished, taking a fruit from the table, he stood up from his chair, waved at me, and headed towards the door. I followed him, always ready to attack, with water in the form of a tightly compressed ball of hot steam right behind me. Don't tense up so much, I told you, there's no reason for me to harm you. But you're all still headed to the Northern Water Tribe, right? Why, if you're already planning to teach him, the old man asked, stopping and turning to me, squinting his eyes. Old man, I'm self-taught. My methods of learning bending differ significantly from all known ones. My methods require much more time, persistence, focus, but I think my strength and skills speak for themselves. Yes, you're right. I'm over 100 years old. I've seen the beginning of the war with the Fire Nation and its entire course. I've met many benders, including waterbenders, but none had abilities like blood control. Your water control is on a completely different level. And so, I don't understand why you and the others need to go to the Northern Water Tribe. As I said, I have my methods of using bending. But I admit, in healing bending, for which the Northern Water Tribe is famous, I'm practically at the bottom. I can heal myself, which has allowed me to become physically stronger very quickly. But I can't heal serious injuries. I wouldn't be able to reattach a severed limb, not on myself, and certainly not on others. I want to acquire this knowledge. It will make me stronger. Better. And being able to heal others is also useful. Besides, I'd be interested in challenging the benders of the Northern Water Tribe. Aang will be learning there too. Maybe the locals have something interesting. Maybe there's something for me to learn as well. I see. So, you're also seeking knowledge there? Ha ha ha. Bumi laughed and turned around the corridor again. Walking through the corridor, our conversation with Bumi continued. It became clear several things about him. First, he's very intelligent. Second, he's acquired a lot of wisdom in his life. Third, he's a bit off his rocker. Not in a harmful way, just slightly, but his speech sometimes veers into madness. During our conversation, I also learned why he needed Aang. Unexpectedly, we encountered Aang. Joe, he asked, his eyes darting around. It's me, Aang, me. Imagine, while I was walking through the city intending to buy some spices, I unexpectedly saw you, flying on a stone cart, destroying the stalls of food and spice vendors. Especially upsetting was that the stall where black hot pepper was sold was destroyed by you, and I couldn't purchase such a wonderful seasoning. Thanks to you, it was scattered all over the street. Sorry, Joe, but I really wanted to ride the chutes. I couldn't resist. I convinced Katara and Sokka. Aang began to apologize. Aang, it doesn't matter anymore. You got into trouble because of your own foolishness, now you have to deal with it on your own. Your turn. I nodded to King Bumi, who politely asked not to be called by his name. He said it would be part of the trials he organized for Aang. So, your first trial is a question. What do you think of my outfit today? He asked with a benign old smile. Aang was momentarily taken aback, while I internally laughed, trying to keep a straight face. In my past life, I knew a few guys who ended up in a psychiatric hospital. They had some kind of personality disorder or something else. But the fact was that they were mentally unwell. My acquaintances and I suspected this for a long time, and after they were institutionalized, we often visited them. That slight seed of madness in their eyes, in their speech, they were incredible personalities. You would never get bored with them. Even when everything was bad, when you found yourself in a hopeless situation, one of them, and they were brothers, found an utterly unreal way out. And sometimes they really worked. Not often, but not rarely either. Bumi reminded me of those two psychos. He too had that spark of madness, that which makes one see reality differently from others. Geniuses are madmen. Not all madmen are geniuses. But by their nonconformity and different view of the world, they sometimes deserve the title of genius. King of Omashu was one of them. A strong earthbender, very strong, a bit of a madman. It's a pity that his madness doesn't allow him to see all the possibilities and dangers of earthbending. He uses it like all other earthbenders I've met. Throwing bigger rocks, walls, stone bridges. He probably has some original techniques up his sleeve, but I haven't seen them yet, only the Fisher. Maybe all these factors made me somewhat believe in him. As I pondered, Aang was led to another room, stimulated by the threat of losing his friends, who had rings made of some crystal that grows very fast placed on their fingers. By evening, they were expected to be encased in it. At that moment, I tensed up. I didn't want Aang to lose his friends while I did nothing. They hadn't put a ring on me. I wasn't interfering with Aang's trial, and I did want to teach him a lesson. No need to talk about me to every stranger. However, Bumi noticed my tension, or perhaps he decided on his own, and quietly told me, so others couldn't hear, that the crystal was made from candy, even giving me a small piece to taste, while he bit off a big chunk himself. It was indeed tasty. Joe, can you help? Sokka asked me in a whisper, coming closer, his fingers already covered with the crystal. Of course, what are you talking about, Sokka? I replied, indignantly. I could take out everyone here except for you, but I won't do that. My calm conclusion confused both Sokka and Katara, who was listening in. What? But why? Katara asked. Because I already tried to help you. Right from the start, I told you not to get into trouble. But you rejected the help and didn't listen to me. The result? All this fuss started. Now get yourselves out of this mess, I'm not your helper here. And they're not attacking me, so even here, there's no motive for a fight. Am I making myself clear? I asked sternly, shifting my gaze between Katara, Sokka, and Aang. Their response was only silence and lowered heads from all three. Especially disappointed in you, Sokka. You said you'd watch over them, and you ended up as an accomplice. What does that mean? Your word means nothing? Now I'm inclined to believe exactly that. Good luck with your trial, organized by the respected King of Omashu, Aang. Chapter 19. I stood on the stone balcony in the company of Sokka, Katara, and two odd men of beastly scoundrel appearance, watching Aang's foolishness, or perhaps it could be called naivety, as he challenged Bumi to a duel. Indeed, one wouldn't guess at first glance that he was a powerful earthbender, full of strength and far from succumbing to heart pressure. I myself had been fooled by his appearance. However, I was prepared for any surprise and reacted immediately, whereas now, looking at Aang's astonished face, it was clear he was not. After all, he was still just a 12-year-old boy. It wasn't fair to expect too much from him. My brother wasn't any better at that age, whereas I had a couple of decades of life experience on them. Aang, unfortunately, did not. Bumi's third challenge, to fight and defeat an opponent of his choice. And Aang foolishly chose Bumi as his opponent. Though, in his place, perhaps I would have done the same. So there stood Aang in the arena, with only us, the aforementioned individuals, as spectators, and opposite the Avatar stood King Bumi, ready for battle and proclaimed as one of the strongest earthbenders. Whether that was true, I couldn't say for sure, but of all the earthbenders I had encountered, he was certainly the most formidable at the moment. The fight began with Bumi's move. Boulders flew from the ground and hurled at Aang one after another. Aang dodged most of the projectiles with ease, but the last one hit him, though he managed to soften the blow with a countergust of wind. Aang was thrown back but quickly got up and, no longer playing defensively, sent a strong wave of air towards Bumi, which immediately shattered against a stone wall erected by the king. The wall fell, and Bumi stood on it as if on a surfboard, sending a tsunami of stones and earth at Aang with a few movements of his legs, but the Avatar managed to disperse this unconsolidated wave with a strong air current, then ran towards his opponent. Laughing and enjoying himself, King Bumi created rocks right under Aang's feet, but he easily dodged them, even using them as platforms for himself. Then Bumi stopped and tensed up, and a huge chunk, nearly the entire balcony adjacent to us, separated and rose into the air, causing Aang to stop and turn around, running in circles, around which a strong tornado formed. The thrown multi-ton rock was sucked into the hurricane and, with a slight push of wind, the remnants of which we felt here, flew back towards Bumi. He seemed slightly dazed by this and with one strike turned the entire rock into dust, which showered him, but the raging wind blew it away. But as soon as the dust cleared, he saw Aang extremely close to him. A sweep of the staff by the Avatar made the air obey and sent Bumi flying, crashing him back first into the rock below us. For half a minute, nothing happened, but Bumi emerged unharmed from the dent in the rock and stood before Aang. "You've won. Congratulations." After these words, he fell backward, arms stretched out to the sides, onto the floor, but as if he fell through it, and a few seconds later, he was beside us. That was genuinely cool. Glad Aang managed. Hope he avoids such troubles in the future and uses his head more for thinking and reasoning, rather than just indulging his whims. With these words, I turned and left the balcony, leaving the others behind, not listening to what they were saying. We could talk later. For now, I wanted to walk through the city and finally stock up on spices and seasonings. Last time, that didn't work out. They haven't yet learned of my fondness for spicy food. Last time, I went easy on them when cooking, but this time. 4 hours later, I returned to the palace and found Sokka, Katara, Aang with Appa and Momo, the flying giant bison and the same flying lemur, all ready to depart. It seemed they were only waiting for me. "Joe, how long can one wait for you?" Katara exclaimed upon seeing me. "It's not for you, a 14-year-old who was a co-perpetrator in the reason for our delay of more than a day and a half, to lecture me about being a couple of hours late because of buying spices I couldn't get last time because of your foolishness," I retorted in one breath, glancing at the others. Only Appa remained blameless. Truly, he wasn't at fault. In the end, everyone got an earful: Katara, Aang, Sokka, and even Momo. "Joe," began Aang. "Listen, Aang, I appreciate your phenomenal memory every time you call me by that nickname, but remember, it's my thieving alias, under which I was known as the head of the criminal underworld in one of the cities for a long time. So, please don't call me that to avoid reigniting rumors about elusive Joe reaching the Fire Nation, leading them to hunt us down. It's likely happening already, but let's not make it easier. Remember, my name is Frio." "Yes, sorry, you're right. My apologies, Frio." Aang looked at me remorsefully. "Get on, we still have to reach the North Pole, and along the way, we'll start your training with my method. You might learn something from me before we get to the North Pole." Everyone climbed onto Appa, and with the command "Yip Yip," the flying bison soared into the sky. Interestingly, Appa, perhaps through airbending, shields passengers and the rider from mild winds and oncoming air masses. That means if the weather is good and we're flying on the bison, there's no sensation of oncoming air, which only occurs if the weather is poor and the wind around is stronger. So, Appa protects passengers from winds of a certain strength. When I realized this, I was filled with gratitude for this large beast. Half an hour into the flight, once we were on a stable and direct course, I called Aang to the saddle nest on Appa's back, where I had him sit down and told him to listen. Katara settled next to us, ready to absorb the speech, and Sokka had nothing better to do, so he just listened. First off, I want to tell you both that my bending training methods likely differ significantly from what they'll teach us at the North Pole. My method requires more concentration and patience, involves meditation, but it's ideal for the Avatar, as it allows even a single element bender to gain control over other elements too. For you, Aang, this should take much less time, as avatars are naturally inclined towards all four elements simultaneously, and you should achieve success faster than either me or Katara. However, Katara already has some control over water, so mastering it with my method will allow her to do so much faster. Now, to business. I pulled a cup from one of the bags, filling it with water condensed from the air. Thanks to Appa's smooth flight and the good weather, it's hard to tell we're flying at all, not sitting somewhere on a break. Thus, the water in the cup hardly vibrated. This is the purest water. Your goal is to sit as comfortably as possible and start distancing yourself from all external stimuli. From the feeling of the wind, if it hits your face, from water splashes, from sounds, distance yourself from all stimuli, then do the same with your thoughts. It will take time to fully learn how to distance yourself from all stimuli. Believe me, it will be difficult. It took me about 6 months to understand the essence of the process and to start properly, and that was without anyone to explain it to me, which would have made the process much easier and faster. But I digress. Your first task is to learn to distance yourself from all senses, all stimuli you can notice within yourself. Ultimately, you should find yourself in absolute emptiness. Let me warn you, this may be very frightening, but don't be afraid of it. Your detachment and this emptiness will be maintained by your efforts and concentration. If you relax, everything will return to normal. Your second task will be a lengthy and meticulous examination of each stimulus individually until you find the right one. You need to feel your energy, your bending inside you, constantly flowing within. Once you do, you'll move on to the third step. In this emptiness, you need to concentrate on the water, similarly sifting through the sensation stimuli. It's a long process. Actually, the second and third steps in my method are the longest. When you can feel the energy within the water, all that remains on the fourth step is to learn to align your internal bending with the bending in the water. To resonate with it. And the more inclined you are to the water element, the faster you'll succeed. Now, get started. Chapter 20, Nothing worked out for anyone. We sat and meditated, tried to meditate, on the water in a cup, but no results appeared. Aang probably made the most progress. And no, he couldn't start bending the water either, but he managed to detach himself from many irritants, so he should soon be able to completely detach from irritants and move on to the next stage of development. Meanwhile, I was playing with fire. Just kidding. Obviously, I wasn't playing but being very careful, wouldn't want to accidentally burn the fur of a flying bison. That incident with achieving peak emotional synchronization allowed me to make a leap in development, so that just a couple of hours later, I was able to create a small flame above my palm. The yellow flame, like that of a candle, burned in my hand, and I looked at it with admiration. Another element had succumbed to me. Even if it was only the initial stage, but 3 out of the 4 elements, that means something, indeed. Extinguishing and reigniting the flame in my hand, I spent a couple of hours, until Aang said that it was time to rest Appa. For this, a small clearing with a ditch or a dried-up riverbed not too far away was chosen. Sokka went to look for food. Aang sat in front of the cup with water and meditated, detaching from all irritants. Katara seconded him, while I, with earthbending, created several large rocks around myself and experimented with fire. The experiments revealed several very interesting phenomena. First, fire, as an element, is the easiest to create, and it's done somewhat involuntarily, unlike the other elements, which are used from existing resources, be it soil and rocks for earthbenders, water and liquids for waterbenders, air and gases for airbenders. Firebending, it is created with chi force, not used from already existing sources, though that's also possible. However, after this, new details begin. First, creating flame is simple. Releasing a stream of fire into a rock turned out to be just as simple. Training and development first in waterbending, bloodbending, which is costly in terms of power, and then earth, all this developed bending power in me, and now, creating a huge jet of fire and hitting a rock with it was simple, but just holding the fire in my hands was much harder. Just a couple of minutes of holding it, and my hands start to shake, and bloodbending doesn't help at all. I just don't know what to do to calm my hands and stop the shaking, and I don't feel any physical changes, so I concluded that it's something else. After a couple of minutes of holding a clump of fire in my hands, I could no longer keep it under control, and it burst out of my grasp, shooting out in all directions and even leaving very noticeable marks on the rocks. The first time this happened, I got a bunch of burns on my hands and face, yelping more from surprise than from the burns, so immediately with trembling hands, I created a container in the ground and began to condense water, collecting it there. I spent 10 minutes gathering water and then heated it. "What are you doing?" Katara asked me from behind. "Why aren't you meditating?" I asked, not turning to her and grimacing, using waterbending to remove my clothes. "I couldn't do it yet, and then I heard your scream and silence, so I decided to find out," Katara said, slowly approaching me. Experiments with firebending yielded results. Interesting results, but the payment was quite unpleasant. I turned to her and showed my hands and face, now covered in numerous burns. "Ouch!" Katara recoiled from me. I understand her, given the burning pain, half of my face now, if not more, was in fresh burns. Not the most pleasant sight, right? Now don't interfere with fixing mistakes. Stripping down to my underwear, I quickly climbed into the water, which was steaming, took a deep breath, and submerged. The familiar desire to heal myself completely, and I felt a pleasantly familiar itching sensation all over my body, especially in the places where I previously felt pain from burns. I stayed underwater for a couple of minutes, then surfaced to breathe in some fresh air and dove back under. Each immersion and resurfacing, with the discomfort of the sore spots meeting the water and air, brought a new pulse of pain. However, with each dive, the pain lessened. After 12 immersions, I realized that I no longer felt pain, so the next time I surfaced, I calmly leaned back against the warm earth, compacted to the hardness of stone, made myself an ice mirror, and looked into it. There were no signs of burns on my face anymore, but my hair had been badly singed, leaving an unappealing look. While most of my hair was long, I was too lazy to cut it shorter. The part that caught fire had almost completely burned off, leaving only short spikes that hadn't burned. Obeying my will, a stream of water separated from the rest, forming a thin water thread that with one movement trimmed the excess hair, leaving an even length of about 1.5 inches all over my head. In the mirror, I noticed Katara, who was sitting by the rocks and watching me. "Keep in mind, you're not my type, so don't stare at me so blatantly, Katara. Better go back to Aang and continue meditating." "Can you heal wounds with water?" asked Katara. "Only on myself, but yes, I can. That's why I agreed to teach you, Katara, bending, in exchange for taking me to the North Pole. There, I want to learn full healing. It's a useful skill, you know. Why do you torment yourself? If firebending causes such pain." "Katara, pain is nothing. Yes, it can drive one insane or even kill, but that takes a lot of effort. Pain is only a temporary phenomenon that will pass once the body's malfunction is corrected. Waterbending helps greatly with that. As for the torment, you don't know my past, Katara, you don't know what I've endured and gone through. I've received burns dozens of times, so I've learned to endure pain. Not accustomed to it, I doubt that's possible, although who knows, but I've learned to bear it. But why do you need this? She asked again. And why not? Isn't that a goal in itself? I turned my head towards the girl. To master firebending? No. Why isn't it a goal to study bending? To reach the heights of bending and, by overcoming these heights, finding new paths, becoming better and better, getting closer to perfection, which I will never achieve. To attain mastery in bending. To become the best of the best. Isn't that a goal? A goal I can always strive for, never feeling emptiness within myself, wasting time in vain. And you always want to engage in bending and never do anything else? You need to rest too. Agreed. Right now, I am proof of your words. But one must not confuse rest with laziness. Rest is possible only after work, rest is needed to recover and continue working. Rest can take any form, for one can become tired not just physically, but mentally, spiritually, and in each case, rest is different. So yes, I too enjoy rest, it indicates that you have worked well and not wasted time. Understood. Katara stood up, turned around, and headed back behind the rocks I had created, towards Aang. I'll go to Aang, continue meditating as well. Good luck to you. That's the end of this tale for now. I appreciate you for watching, like and subscribe to get part 2 out faster. Make sure to check out the author and the Discord, both linked in the description. Peace.